Good morning, hello, and welcome everybody to the Game Dev Show. I'm here with Jason, David, and Andrew today. We're going to be talking about a couple different things that have popped up that were kind of new news, and then there was at least one topic that I want to kind of dive into. Oh, and a very cool tool that stumbled across that I think even Jason Story liked, which was very, very, very exciting to hear. So welcome everybody. I'll let everybody say hi.
Hello.
Hi.
Howdy.
All right. And hello to everybody in chat. If you're here with us, please hit the thumbs up button, say hello in chat, and let us know if you have any questions or if anything pops up that you think we should be mentioning, discussing, or talking about. So actually, before I get started, I wanted to really quickly share my screen and remind everybody that the Humble Bundle is still live. Andrew's got all of his, not all of his, but a lot of his really awesome assets, the dragons, the orcs, the weapons, the armor, and the game modules as well. And one of my courses and a new one on game modules that I wanted to update everybody on. I think Tuesday I'm going to open that up to everybody, and then probably either Tuesday or later on this week we'll do a live Q&A call for that course as well. It's going over how to use and integrate Andrew's game modules into a brand new project, so you can kind of see how those work and how you can use them. So if you're interested in that, make sure that you grab the bundle before it disappears. All right, so I'll shut up about bundles and sales. Oh, wait, one other thing. There's an asset store sale that's still going on. That's like live for another week or so, though, right?
I think live for another week, and I've been told that there's going to be 1 week after that of the best of. They did this last summer too, where they ended with the best of the best or whatever. So it's 1 more week of what's on sale now, and then another week of whatever was the best selling stuff, I think.
Nice. So it's going to be, so there's still some time to get those, but I'll go check them out too, see if there's anything cool. I've already grabbed a ton of stuff because I've been working on this little spaceship game in my when I'm in bed, and I'm like constantly adding new features and new things, and I'm like, oh, let me just go grab an asset for that and just drop something in. So it's it's worthwhile for me, at least. I love the sales and all that though. So today the things I want to talk about, and I guess let's see which one you guys want to hit first. That $17 billion acquisition offer that just popped up, which I thought was interesting. After looking into it a little bit more, I don't think it's likely to go through or go anywhere, but it's definitely an interesting thing to talk about. I also really wanted to talk about that GameData system. So do you guys have a preference on where we start, or does anybody in chat have a preference on where we start?
Let's get over that stupid acquisition thing first.
You want to get over that one and knock it out? Let's
it's
do
a
it.
2-minute thing in it. So
all right. So let's see if I can pull up some nice visuals here. But for everybody who didn't see it, very recently, AppLovin offered, what was it, 17 or $17.5 billion in stock, essentially, to buy out Unity. Is that accurate?
I think to merge with them, and they would be valued at 50 billion or 30 billion or so. I don't know what. I don't know. It was some merger thing, but it also required them to not do the deal with the Iron Forge folks, which to me was like, don't go with them, go with me. I'm cuter than your new boyfriend. Take me to prom instead.
Got it. Interesting. So they're trying to like move in on the acquisition. Now, I don't know a lot about AppLovin, but when I was looking into them, it seemed like they do similar things to Iron Source. Like they're doing app or like mobile monetization and stuff. Is that accurate? Do you guys know?
Yeah.
Okay. So they're just like basically trying to compete with it. And the one post that I saw, let me see if I can find this really good post real quick, or the reply here on YouTube. Somebody had replied. I put up a poll, was it 2 days ago, seeing if people thought it was a good idea. Let's pull this up. And one person. So you can see everybody pretty much said no, or I have no idea.
No idea.
Only a tiny percent of people said yes, and a couple people
All,
thought
all
maybe
that 5% work for app loving, by the way.
they might. I don't know. But the comment that I pinned here, they actually kind of dove deep into
Oh wow.
their specific thoughts, and they've done some research on it. I obviously haven't checked any of this research, but they seemed very opposed to it and seemed to think that AppLovin's valuation was largely based on acquisitions and stuff, and that they think that the Iron Source one was a better option. I'm really curious though, because I don't know a whole lot about the details, what everybody else thinks, and my guess is probably going to go nowhere at all, and they're just going to stick with what they're doing. But I have no fucking idea, or no inside info, or no info beyond what anybody else knows. It's just my wild ass guess. So, do you guys have any thoughts on this one?
I think it's interesting that this whole summer, Unity and others around Unity have been managing to get a lot of game developers talking about business stuff rather than making games.
Yeah, well, I don't know that it's necessarily Unity doing it. It's everybody else offering to buy them out, right? Like,
yep.
Yeah. It's probably a buyout summer. All the stock is in the floor, so everybody's like, "Oh, we can buy these companies for next to nothing. So let's just buy everybody." Or you make an offer on a company before the stock hits the floor, and then you try and back out of it. But that's a whole different thing. These companies, it's going to be a lot of companies wanting to buy Unity. They're an important company in the games industry. The games industry is the biggest entertainment industry out there as far as monetarily is concerned. Yeah, I mean, for app loving, there's a couple of things, isn't there? One, Iron Source. If Iron Source gets in the door with Unity and Unity use them rather than external parties, people start using Iron Source for their app, for their ad management rather than anybody else. Maybe they lose some commercial market in there, and see as though Unity does more mobile games than as an engine than nearly any of the other big engines, then
probably
it's
all
a big
of the
deal
other
for
ones
them.
combined is my guess.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a big deal for them. They could lose money out of that potentially. Obviously, I'm not a person in the room, so I don't know. But yeah, you're going to hear a lot of these things. People are going to be worried. Don't quit Unity because companies are trying to buy Unity. That just why?
Yeah, and I think that you kind of hit it right at the beginning with the stock thing. I think most of this is all happening just because the entire stock market's down, and a lot of the tech stocks have plummeted, especially all the ones that recently IPO'd in like the last couple of years that came out really, really high and then dropped down. Whatever they starts wanting to buy them up, just like Twitter, right? Like, I feel like it's a lot like Musk wanting to buy Twitter, but trying to buy it with just stock.
And that's the other thing. I mean, a lot of these, you'll hear the term merger because they're basically just buying it with stock rather than actually producing a full acquisition. And then you'll find these companies are borrowing massive against their capital to be able to afford to buy these other companies, which means they're going to be in massive debt, which obviously is not a great thing. And
that was one of the things they went into on that comment too, was about them leveraging and having debt. And I don't know any of the details on it again, but it was it seemed interesting at least. But my expectation is it's probably not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be very weird if it did.
I assume you got no other thoughts on that one either, Jason?
If I had to have a thought, I would quote my boy Marcus Aurelius: "I do what is mine to do; the rest does not disturb me." So
Fair enough.
I have nothing I can deal with this. So, I mean, we can ponder till the cows come home, but it's not really going to solve anything, right? So.
Very fair. All right, so we got a super chat here. It says, I wanted to ask an important question. I'm trying to figure out my life from here. Is 31 years old too old to start getting into game design or development?
Wow, I just got aged
If you're
heavily.
past like 17, I'd say it's probably too old. You got to start as a kid.
Yeah, you got to be ingrained, graph paper at 8 years old. Otherwise, nope. Of course not. I was 32. Yeah. I was 32
really?
when I picked up Unity. Maybe 33, I forget. Yeah. So no, complete change in direction for me. So
I've known quite a few people who got into coding in their 20s or some even in their 30s that had done no programming before. Actually, some that got into programming in their 30s and became like really good, successful programmers. They were just into something else that was different, hadn't ever tried programming, and then jumped over. I can think of at least one guy right off the top of my head that's like an expert, like amazing programmer that started in his 30s. But yeah, no, it's definitely not too late. You just gotta jump in right away. I would say start right away. Don't wait.
yeah, I think there's benefits in some ways to starting, or at least being in it when you're older too, because you've got a lot of other experiences that 20 somethings don't have. You know, you've got experience working, you've got experience being an adult, you've got experiences in other industries that could lead to some interesting features of your personality and your ethics and your just work portfolio that some companies might find valuable.
Somebody asked, what is graph paper? I used to use that stuff all the time, by the way. Like as a kid, before they couldn't just do things out on computers and make all my games on like little mazes on graph paper and stuff. And
yeah,
This show
Mazes.
is just designed to make us feel old, isn't it?
Yep.
It is.
mazes.
Oh, you're from the 1900s. You gotta be reminded all the time. 36 and just started a year ago. Yeah, so I'd say it's definitely not too late to jump in. You get in and just start building stuff. Go ahead.
More of the question on that is, he wrote, is it too old to get started into game design or game development? I assume you mean programming as game development with some element of actually building, because development has kind of got merged into the whole, I'm a programmer, no, I'm a developer. So really, the best thing to work out is what you want to do in the game industry if you want to join, and then start playing, getting in.
Sounds like Dread wants to be a game designer. Saying, do you think I could go to school at 32 and get a job in game design? What do you guys think? I don't know the best ways. I wish Salim was here right now because he's much better at game design jobs. He hires and fires game designers all the time. So what do you guys think? What would you recommend for somebody who wants to get into the design side of it at any age, really?
Well, I mean, there's courses available now that were never there back in the day. I mean, game programming wasn't a thing back when me and Jason were at university. Well, don't think it was over here. It certainly wasn't where I was.
No, I mean, game programming was like one of those things that maybe one school has one class on. Like there's one semester that you could take, or one quarter. Yeah.
I remember all my professors looking down on it. So, yeah. By the way, if they're still out there, yeah, best of luck with them. Look, there's loads of courses out there, and there are very good courses out there to start getting into it. The best thing is to start diving in. I mean, do you play a lot of games? Do you
play a lot of video games? Got into computer repair, so they're doing some tech stuff already and want to do game design.
Yeah, you're going to need to start getting a portfolio together straight away. And this is just somewhere you're going to start putting your own stuff up onto. So as you sit there and evaluate what does Mario's jump look like, and you start breaking this stuff down, what do the core mechanics of this game, what are they, and how do they break down, and how did they do that, and why did they do that, why did they make that decision? Become a video game critique. Talk about what you would do differently in those sort of things in a blog. Start writing these things down, start getting them out there. Look at schools, look at tutorials online, tutorials from people that have done it before, not just some YouTuber who's straight out of college who thinks they know how to do it, somebody who's actually got some qualification behind them. Get really annoyed with talking to people that have done a course in YouTube and are like, I don't understand. Why doesn't it work properly? It's because the guy you learned it off has never actually built a video game.
Well, that's one of my favorite comments I saw in the chat there. It's like, everywhere I look, they want senior developers. Really? They want senior people when they're hiring people. Like, you're having trouble finding those job offers that are like, looking for someone inexperienced. I'm looking for someone who doesn't know what they're doing, that can learn on my time, on my money. Everyone wants senior everything. No matter what you're hiring, you want the best person you can afford. That's usually the rule. And so if the argument is I'm not there yet, well, what's more likely? Are they going to hire someone with 0 experience? Or if you've been working on it for 2 weeks, you're now someone with 2 weeks experience. If you had to pick between those two, which one do you pick? What about someone working on it for 6 months? Which you could. The thing is, if you're a junior, the answer isn't, oh my God, they're all seniors, I can't get a job. The answer is, well, then you got to like start moving faster because you've got a lot to catch up on, right? Just to start learning stuff and put stuff out there and meet people. There isn't a shortcut for this. You're not going to find the secret elevator that gets you to the top that puts you on the same level as the seniors. If you're not a senior, then start walking.
Yeah, there's too many people that think that there's a shortcut to getting into this industry, and there's a shortcut to being a Story or a Andrew or a Weimann.
There is a shortcut. You just take a different job at the company. and then you just bump right. And that's something I would recommend on this. Like if you're doing computer repair stuff, if there are, if you're not having success applying at these game design positions, look at those same company more tech positions too, because they're going to have general like tech support positions and the like people setting up the computers, fixing all that stuff, managing and maintaining it. And once you're in the company, it's 10 times fucking easier to get into any of the positions. A game design job opens up, and you know the game designers. You're talking to them. You're the one that's been helping them, working with them. I would highly recommend, if you're not just getting straight in and you have some related skill, some technical skill that can get you into the company, use that to get in right away, or just go in like through QA and customer service as well, especially if you're having a hard time, and especially for game design, where it's a lot harder to prove yourself on your own, because it's hard to design and build a game on your own and prove that the design is good enough that they should care. It's really good to just get into the company there. Or the best thing is obviously just fucking knowing people, like knowing somebody that works there, go way better, way further than anything else you could do.
Yeah, and I've seen designers talking before about the fact that they don't know what to build into a portfolio because they're not programmers, they're not artists, they don't know how to get into that. I've heard of designers getting jobs from literally having an online blog where they talk about games they're playing, what they would change in those games, what makes up those games, how the mechanics work. So when you're looking at portfolios and you're like, I'm not a programmer, how am I supposed to build a game so I can do this? There's that as a resource. The other thing is there's plenty of groups out there that you can join that have hacks, the hackathons, game jams and stuff like that, where you can be a game designer in a group. Because there's most of the time when you go to these game jams, they're all programmers. Like they're all, is there an artist out there? Can I have an artist? Is there an artist? I need an artist, because there's not a lot of artists that are doing those game jams. But also a lot of those people aren't designers. So their game comes out and the mechanics are terrible. It doesn't quite fit properly. So getting in there and then putting that game on your portfolio as, I was the designer that helped in this game jam to produce this game. This is what I did in it. This is what I learned from it. These are the mechanics that we built into it. This is the game design document that I built post the game jam or during the game jam that helped this game move along. There you go. Those are some portfolio pieces you can stick in there.
And I mean, again, to every variation of this question, put yourself in the shoes of somebody hiring somebody else. So for questions like, there was another one earlier about is playing games a waste of time if you're trying to apply for a game dev job? Well, ask yourself, if you're hiring somebody, you were making a game, you wanted to hire a designer. There was 2 people, one of them said, I play games all day. It's cool. What did you learn from that? Oh, I love games. Or I play games all day. What did you learn from that? Well, it's actually interesting. The design of this level is they use an asymmetric design, because like it's not a question of hours of time played equals skill. It's like, are you learning? Are you applying things? Are you getting things from it? Like, these questions are not unique to games. They're not unique to juniors or seniors. They're the same question, the same time, and every single variation of it boils down to, do you want this person on your team? Is this person employable? What's the answer? Are they trying? Do they put effort in? Are they good at what they're doing? And if the answer is, well, how do I demonstrate that? Well, you demonstrate that. You do something. And if the short answer is, well, I don't know, it's a field I'm not very familiar with, like game design, well, then do something else. Go do programming. Go do web design. Get a skill that demonstrates you are a skilled individual who applies effort at something, and then meet people in a tangential field and parlay one to the other. Like a lot of work that we said earlier is like Jason was saying, get into the company. I mean, I've seen people who are highly driven, talented people get hired into jobs that they have zero experience for, because if you know the person, you're like, oh, they'll pick it up. I know this person. They're driven. They want to learn. They're the kind of person that'll learn it. So it's such a fallacy to like, oh, you need to have X experience. Of course, a resume is going to do it. Like if you yourself were hiring someone even just to watch your house for a week, you're not going to say, doesn't need to have experience with anything. Just chill out. I don't care who you are. You're going to put in must have 2 years experience doing this, that, because you want to set a bar, right? So there is a level of, kind of, there's an arms race being played between hirers and people looking for jobs. You're going to have to put a minimum spec on the resume, and then your job is to puff yourself up as high as you can to treat every single thing you've ever done as a high value thing. So there's a game being played with resumes. There's a game being played with numbers. Don't look at those things. The truth is, it boils down to, are you employable? And you kind of know this yourself. Like you can, if you're asking these questions, you might have to question yourself first, going, would I hire me? Would I hire me to do this job? And it just comes down to figuring that out, right? And if not, find out why. What would you want you to know to be hireable in that job? And if the question is, I don't know how to do the job, so I don't know what that person is looking for, well, then go learn that first. Find out what it takes to do that job. Like same question, same answers every time. Like there's not going to be a shortcut. Unfortunate truth is, you just have to do it.
The other thing, if you're going to a game company, is play their games, especially if you're going as a game designer. Have experience playing their game.
With any company, know the company that you're applying for. Have questions for them so they know you've done your homework.
Yeah. I mean, Blizzard explicitly says on their applications, tell us, have you got a game account with us? Because they want to look at you and work out, have you played the games that we're actually building here?
And again, it's the same thing. Like it's the same thing. If you're hiring somebody to do something, it would help if they have experience in it. I mean, that's not unique to games. It just sounds like, of course they do. If you're hiring someone to paint houses and they paint landscapes, but they've never painted a house before, you're like, would love to have seen you paint a house. Or, hey, we're specifically trying to paint dinosaurs in this particular project we're working on. Do you have experience painting dinosaurs? Like, have experience in the thing you're trying to do is not a big request. And honestly, to kind of go back to what we were saying earlier, it also speaks to the kind of scenario, is that it's the kind of person that does the research in advance that you would want. Like, I'll put it this way. I don't know if I would hire myself, but I know I would be very good at talking myself into it. I'd be very good at interviewing against myself, because I would find out what kind of person I am. I would go online and see who I am online, and I would make a pitch that is somebody looking for someone like me. So whether I'd be good at the job is a different story, but the short answer is I would probably interview well with myself, if that helps.
Yeah. I think it's important to remember that you should probably just apply anyways to these jobs, even if you don't think you're qualified, because one, you might be qualified and not know it. Sometimes you're better than you think you are, which actually oftentimes you're better than you think you are. Second part is, these folks say senior this, senior that. They may not have gotten a single applicant for all you know. And you might come in being, well, you're good enough. And maybe you're not up that level, but they got no one else and they have to hire someone. So they're willing now to take on someone who's a little lower than they really wanted because you're the only one who applied. So that's possible too. And then third, the experience of applying, of interviewing, and then dealing with rejection, asking after that rejection, what could I have done better? Where did I go wrong? A lot of hiring managers and interviewers will answer that question, and they'll tell you exactly what you can do to improve your next interview or where you need to focus on. And so there's a lot you can learn just by interviewing. And then you might just get lucky and realize, oh, I got the job just like that. That's amazing.
Although I will say a cautionary tale on that front. Here's something that isn't talked about as much. We've mentioned before something called the Peter principle. And I see this more than any other scenario in companies I've worked with, which is you're worried about getting the job. I've met many people who got the job as a junior dev. The senior dev on whatever team or project they're on leaves after a year or so. The company is left with the most senior person being you. And congratulations, you're now the senior person. That may sound like a dream come true, but what you've now got is realistically a job you can't do, that you've not been trained for, and deadlines that you don't know how to meet. And no matter how hard you try, you're going to burn yourself out doing it. So it's not always a good thing to be good at talking yourself into positions you're not ready to do. I've done it many times, and I've had to learn my lesson to be careful that being able to talk yourself up isn't always a good thing. You have to know yourself and be realistic in the jobs you're taking. I'd say most people, it's the other way around. Most people, they're too afraid to apply rather than getting themselves in awkward situations. But it is worth noting that you want a job you can sustain doing. You want something that hits just at your level, that's a little bit too hard for you. Something that gives you enough bite to have fun at doing and constantly getting better at, but not something where you feel like you're drowning every day, because that's so much worse. It's so much worse. It'll burn you out of doing those kinds of jobs if you get yourself in a position you're not ready for and you spend 2-3 years just hating it, just constantly feeling like the entire industry is against you. So realistically, don't try to jump to the top of the ladder too fast. It won't help you.
Yeah, I would say if you're in that position too, just start looking for something else. Like if it's miserable for 2 or 3 years, you should have left a while before, and start looking at some other opportunities.
Yeah, I think that's a standard in any job. If you're unhappy in your job, find another job. Do what you can to find another job.
Unless you're a sadist.
Unless you're what? A sadist?
A sadist.
Yeah.
And you love it. And
That's
stick it out.
Or the pay is just too good. That tends to be the other thing with stuff. The pay is just too nuts. People don't want to quit. I like Ed's comment here, though, that I can't guarantee you'll get the job if you apply, but I can guarantee you won't get it if you don't apply. This is like one of the things I constantly feel like I have to tell people over and over and over. Like, and it happens like with everybody. They're just always afraid that they're not qualified for the job and just don't actually try or apply for the job because I think often it's just like a fear of rejection, or a fear of like, maybe I'm going to not feel comfortable when I have to go do this interview that I don't feel qualified for. But I think it's very, very important to just get over it and push that right the fuck out of the way. And it's like, doesn't matter. Like if I don't get the job, I don't get the job. And like you said, Jason, just ask them why. Start diving into, what do I need to actually improve? Because if you don't get the job and you just sit around and mope about it and don't do anything, that's not going to be very helpful. But if you don't get the job and you ask them what the problem is or what it was that they didn't, that you needed that didn't have, you can spend the time and actually focus on learning that thing or those things and getting better at those things, or adjusting whatever those things were that you did stupid in the interview, which you might have just been saying something dumb, or you might have just came off wrong, or they might have thought your personality wasn't a good fit, and you can try to figure out why that was. Like what was it that you did that irritated them? Usually it's going to be something technical, though, that you just didn't know and failed in the technical parts. And then those things you can easily dive in and really learn about. And you'll find that most of the time when you're interviewing, people are asking very similar or the same kind of shit. So after you do it 3 or 4 times, you find that all of the things that you've researched and looked up after failing are really useful because they start to pop up in these other future interviews. And they also start to become useful in your actual projects and code because you're learning about things that people are actually caring about and using.
Yeah, there's a fun note from my side, which is that one employer I worked for once, he called me out because he really hated the way I used to say this, and I still say it because I still believe it's true, is I'm not a gambler. I don't like taking risks. And he said, I hate when you say that, so because that's a horrible mindset. And he's a classic entrepreneurial type businessman, really likes, the whole thing. And I was like, I think there may be a disconnect in how we see the world, but like, that's not saying I don't take risks. It's just I always try to skew things in my favor. Like if we're talking about getting jobs, from my perspective, rolling a dice to get your dream job is gambling. You're just hoping that it'll land on the number you want. Now, there's multiple ways to limit this. You can not gamble at all and save yourself the emotional fear of getting it wrong, or you can try to acquire more dice. So I learn as many things as I can. Each one is a possible die, is a particular job that may or may happen. I put myself out there in as many places as I can, in as many communities and on many YouTube channels, and do as much content as I can that demonstrates the amount of stuff that I've learned as I go. Each one of these is another dice roll that I don't have to even be there to see land. If one of them lands, someone will DM me or email me or reach out to me, or a friend of a friend will reach out to me. So it's not that I don't like taking any risk at all. It's that I just don't see the point in putting all of your hope on gambling. You can just live your life, increase the likelihood things work out for you. And eventually they will, not because you're amazing, but because if you keep stacking the deck in your favor, something positive will happen. It's the way it works.
All right. Well, let's see. There was a follow-up question on this that I wanted to take, which was about the questions that come up in the interviews. They're wondering if the technical questions are very specific to the games or questions? What I'm just curious because it's been a little while since I've had to do a technical interview, maybe like 2 or 3 years at least. Do you guys find that like the questions, in my experience, they're always like the very same? It's like generic, simple questions, and there's like one that's about the specific thing that they have that they're working on that they've come up with. But most of the questions are just generic stuff, like about
Yeah, it's usually like make template game or something. Just do basic to demonstrate you understand Unity or whatever.
How do you detect if an object's in front of you, or how do you deal with collisions, or it'd be like depending on the level of complexity, or how would you architect the system at like a higher end, depending on what position they're hiring for. But yeah, I find that they're usually pretty simple. There's often a lot of simple vector math questions that pop up, I think because they're like trivia and easy to ask, and I don't know, they tend to pop up a lot. And then some basic like code flow problems. You'll see those a lot. FizzBuzz type things used to be really popular outside of game dev. Usually in the game dev side, it'd be some little like a game specific problem. I personally like to give them like a bit of broken code and have them try to figure out what's wrong with it. See if they can track down what the actual issue is just by looking at the code and see if they understand what's going on there with something that's not too complicated. Dave, you got some thoughts there? Your chin looks like it's thinking a lot.
My chin's always thinking a lot. It's just trying to pull out the grey rather than the dark hair. Yeah, I mean, it depends on the interviewer and the experience of the interviewer half the time as to what sort of questions you'll get. I've been in interviews where they've given me stupid questions, like how do you do the Fibonacci sequence and stuff like that. And you just want to punch them in the face and say, come on, give me a proper question. All the way through to people that have sat there and gone, you're building a racing game, you've got a car going down a track, the car goes off the hill and crashes, where do you reset the car? And then you talk about the different processes you can go through to where you're going to reset the car on the track and how you're going to do it. The answer is not right where you fell off, by the way. And then there's things like you're going to write A-star pathfinding. Show me A-star pathfinding. And again, some of these questions will come in at the level you're coming in at and what sort of responsibilities you're going to have. And they vary from company where you'll turn up, you'll be there for an hour for an interview and you're like, great, job done. Or you'll be there for an entire day if they're hiring for a much more senior position or a management position. I've been flown out to companies to sit there for an entire day and then spend the night in a hotel and then fly back the next day because it's a much more senior position that you're going in for. So when you go to those sort of interviews, you're going to get a ton of different interviews around different things, from how do you manage people, how do you build code, how do you build platforms, how do you build libraries, how do you build tools, how do you build this. It very much depends on the job you're going in for. Now, when I interview people for junior positions or middling positions, which I think probably a lot of people here are going to be looking at, I do both a Unity style quiz, a Unity set of questions, but I also give people C# questions because I want to gauge. And that's what you're doing as an interviewer. You're gauging where the level of the person is. So if you can't answer every question, don't worry about it, because sometimes they're just trying to work out this person's at this sort of level and they can achieve this, rather than I'm trying to catch you out. They're never trying to do that. Well, they shouldn't be trying to do that. If they are, don't work for that company. They're trying to gauge where you're actually at. So they might turn around and say, okay, I've got a piece of code here, and in my update loop, it's going find this for Unity. And you're like, oh, yeah, we shouldn't do that because doing that there is really unoptimized. It's really bad and all the rest of it. We should. By the way, when you answer those sort of questions, and usually an interviewer will take you through the questions afterwards, you get bonus points if you could say why and what you could do instead, and giving options and why those options are good. That proves you know your stuff, you know where you're going, and you've got a creative thinker in front of you. That means you can spin and you can jam with them and you can talk through. And I like to jam with people as we're sitting there doing the questions. I like to say, okay, cool. You've said you can't do that, but how are we going to do that? And why are we going to do that? And why would you do that? And what knock-ons does that have? And all the rest. And it's just, again, trying to work out the level you're at when you come into the actual interview.
Yeah, I mean, I've done the same. I've said before, I look for rants. That's my thing. Is there's people who do programming love talking about programming. We're here. That's what we're doing. If you get an opportunity to talk about something you really loved or you really hated, you're probably going to take it. And so to kind of say that gauging, there's basically, in my mind, there's two phases. There's try to get rid of, hit the markers of base level. Do they know the fundamentals? And that's just basically, how do they answer questions effectively in certain ways? And then once you get past that, the next part is gauging where their interests lie and how it relates to what you're doing. And so for me, the easiest answer to both of those questions simply boils down to ask them vague questions around all the projects they worked on until you find one where the nature of the way they answer questions tells you that they've worked a lot on it. Because some people will say, oh, I worked on this big project, but they won't give you any details because they were like on the side of it. But then they'll say, but I didn't work on this project where I did this and this. You're like, so you actually worked on that one. That was one where you genuinely did some stuff on it. Let's drill down there. I don't really care about trying to impress me in the big project. Good to have it in your resume, whatever. But what's more valuable is what project did you work on? And once I can tell you've worked on that project, I'll start asking questions without giving you the answer of like, oh, hey, how did you handle this problem? Or, did you have any issues with scaling too many objects or doing this kind of thing? And see if they go ... pooling, or, oh, actually, we didn't have that issue because we batched rendered the mesh, whatever it is they're going to say. It's like, cool, okay, I'm not even going to like quiz them on it. I'm just going to see where do they go with that, because they don't need to have all the right answers. They just need to have answers, because that tells me they actually know what they're talking about and it wasn't someone else on the team that did it. And then once they are talking about it, the best way to figure out if they do know what they're talking about is somebody who's honestly going to admit when they had trouble. My favorite thing to do, both as an interviewer and an interviewee, is when someone asks about a project, go, oh, yeah, I had this really frustrating problem. So I was working on this thing, right? And the API says it's supposed to be like this, but it wasn't, because when I pulled down the data and go into a big rant about something, the person's going to enjoy it because we've all been there, but it also tells you, okay, they looked into it. They had a problem. They're telling you how they reasoned about it. They researched the problem. They found out the answers. They applied different solutions. All of a sudden, you're like, okay, this person knows how to see a problem, how to tackle it. They have a sense of humor about it. They're engaged in problems. Like, so much information you get from somebody just willing to either go on a fun rant about this really niche part of a game engine, or the opposite, which is, I worked on this system. It was so fun. I was researching this stuff and I watched this guy's video. He was really great at this thing and he taught me this. Suddenly it's like, oh, they do research. Like, I'm not looking for the words they say. I'm looking for what it tells me about how they approach things. And you get a lot more of that by just organically engaging with the questions. And that's why what I consider the really good interviewers are trickier with you, because they won't really ask you direct questions. They'll just keep asking you questions around what you're doing. And if they know their job well enough, they'll be able to spot whether you're telling the truth or not. That's not to say a technical thing isn't good. But the truth is, if you ask the right questions in an interview setting, you can tell when someone is skirting the details because they don't feel like they have enough answers to give you. And so you don't need to give them a quiz whether they can like write the exact line of code if everything in their body language and the way they respond is like moving away from the answers to the questions that you're kind of alluding to you wanting. And again, they don't have to have the right answer. They just have to be confident enough to engage with the question.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of perfect. I think having the big discussions too, like turning it into these longer discussions where you're talking about those things and actually being able to dive into, like, discuss the things you're working on, makes a huge difference. So those are the interviews where you're way more likely to get hired, where it's actually become like a discussion, not just a technical Q&A. Can you solve this problem? Can you solve this problem? If it never gets to that discussion phase, I find that there's usually not a job offer, right? If you're never getting into like the chatting about what they're doing and what they would be doing on the project and those kinds of things. If it's just the technical testing part and it ends there, it's probably didn't go pretty well. Or you got to turn that around. All right. So there were a bunch of pinned questions, but I wanted to pop something up on the screen real quick too, just as an example of a technical question, because I did one earlier this week that I put up on YouTube as a poll, not really a poll, but a post to see if people could solve it. Oh, let me get rid of this chat that's over our faces, to see if people could figure out what the problem was here, and probably most people didn't know what it was, but at least quite a few people in the chat or in the comments were able to call out exactly what the issue is. And I was just wanted to pop it up here. Let me make it a little bit bigger and show it to everybody, because this is like the kind of thing that I might pop up as a test if I want to see if they understand how LINQ works, right? Like, very simple one. So do you guys see what the issue is right here?
Well, it might have been harder if you didn't leave on the IntelliSense giving you the hints at where where there are issues.
Sure. But yeah, the big problem here was so this was a little bit of code that that's attempting to find out what resources haven't been discovered by a space station when a ship docks. So they both have an inventory, and it checks to see what items have not been discovered yet that are on this new ship. So it can maybe pop up a little dialogue and say there's some new thing here. But because of the position of line 33, it does not work at all because it actually adds in the resources to the to that. Wait, is this the bat? Yeah, this is the bat. So it adds them in, and then it never discovers anything because the way that the enumeration works, because it happens afterwards, because it redoes that enumeration on the new resources because they get added into the discovered. So then it re-enumerates on line 35, or I forget the technical word for it, but it does the enumeration again on line 35, and there's no longer anything in there because it's been added to that discovered resources. So it was just an interesting LINQ statement issue test type thing. I'm going to stop sharing it now.
To be fair, though, just as a note, for anybody who is confused with that, LINQ isn't a requirement. I wouldn't begrudge someone if they didn't actually understand it. That's not like oh, you should all know this. It's just an interesting thing more than anything. It tells you a lot if they do know about it, but it's not mandatory by any measure.
I think it's important to be able to, at the very least, read it though, because if you can't read and try to generally ascertain what a LINQ statement's saying, you're going to run into a lot of cases where you just look at the code and it looks like some weird gobbledygook magic. So you got to at least kind of loosely understand. You might not need to know how to write it. I think it's good to know how to write some basic LINQ statements, but you should at least be able to like know kind of what it's doing, be able to discern what's happening by looking at the statement or have an idea of it.
Yeah, the way
go ahead.
The way specifically with LINQ, because for people who are a bit confused, the way I like to reason about it, because again, it isn't very clear at first, is when you see LINQ statements like that, it's tempting to think of it as, oh, it's a list. It's like a list or an array. There's a bunch of stuff in a box somewhere, and I look at the box. Well, actually, think of it more like if I drew a box on the ground, and then there was like, it's in the middle of in the middle of a supermarket. I drew a box on the ground, and at any point I could say, hey, how many people are in the box? And you look over, and there's currently 2 people standing in the box over by the soup aisle. And it's like the answer is 2. And then you look away, and you just go at it, and then you come later on and go, oh, how many people's in the box? Well, those people have moved on, and there's some more people in the box now, or less people, and the number might be 3 or 5 or whatever. And so, if you're using a LINQ statement, it is performing the look at. It's like looking over and seeing what's there. And every time you do that, you're going to get different answers depending on who's currently standing in the box. And so the point of the problem here is if you keep looking over at the box at different times, you get different results. What you need to do is look over the box and write down what you see and then refer to that written down answer. And the answer to that is you turn it into a list or turn it into an array. And if you want to know how to do that in LINQ, there's a thing at the end of a LINQ statement called .to_list or .to_array. And then you end up with a closed answer. You don't have this open possibility space of things that may or may not have numbers of things in it. It is you have iterated once and gotten the answers to it. So that's also why there's a yellow underline on the any statement, because that's like saying look over and count if there are any people in the box. There might have been a second ago, there might not be now, and there might be again in a second, but that doesn't tell you anything. That's no use for you if you're attempting to iterate the number of people that were in the box at the time at which you checked first, if that number has changed now. So you never really want to be doing multiple iterations over, or enumerations to be precise, over an enumerable. So an enumerable is a built query. It is the reason you use LINQ at all is you take a collection and you apply a number of operations. Get me all the things in the list where has this value and has these things in it, but not these ones, and then take 2 of them, but then sort the list and then give me this. That's a query that you've baked. It hasn't been run yet. It is a collection of statements that to be ran on a collection that result in an answer. And you can pass that hypothetical query around all you like, add more parts to it and like change it. But at some point you have to stop and say, okay, run it and look at the box. Tell me what's in it. And once you've done that, you don't want to run the query again. You want to store that value and move on. And so that's what's happening here, is that it is effectively 3 different times you're looking into the box and seeing slightly different answers.
Well, actually, we're only seeing different answers twice. Once, right? We see different answers.
Well, the Annie's looking in the box. It may not be giving you different answers, but you are
actually,
looking in the
it's
box.
always getting the same answer. It's just that it's looking at the wrong time. It's adding it. It doesn't actually look until it's already added the resources there.
Yeah.
So the easy fix for this one is just moving line 33 down below here. And realistically, line 35 doesn't need to exist because it's just doing an enumeration here.
Which wouldn't do anything if there was nothing in it.
Deleted, yeah. And then line 33 just gets moved down below. The code works without having to array. Now, there was a question in chat. When should you not do a to array or to list? And in this case, I would say it doesn't necessarily, it's just not needed. It would be an extra allocation. So maybe in this case, I probably wouldn't. But if I'm reusing the list multiple times, that's when you generally do it. Because in this case, really, you only do it once. You wouldn't need to. The multiple enumeration can be resolved just by reordering the code. But if you can't do that, then doing it to a list or to array is usually the right way. It does get to be problematic if that data set is very large, though. Like if it's small, it's probably not going to matter at all. If the data set's huge, then you might have to start thinking about it a little bit more. But
and in fact, something that LINQ will even recommend to you, it may seem a bit wacky at first, but oftentimes what functions do is they return values as IEnumerable or as queryable, because that gives you the most amount of freedom. It means you can change the underlying data type to like dictionary or whatever without being an issue. But if you keep a consistent, mostly enumerate to an array or whatever when you're doing your data, you can do a little bit of a performance cheat, which is rather than iterating the entire collection again, it might be an array returned as an enumerator that you then enumerate back into an array, complete waste of performance. Or you can check if the enumerator is an array and then just cast it to an array. It's a bit messy, but that's what you can save a little bit of performance if you actually if you have a consistent is list or is array and then cast it to that thing, you don't have to iterate a larger collection. I don't do it very often, but it is a scenario where if you know it's a large collection, you don't have to force iterate it multiple times. That works.
All right, I just opened up the giveaway, by the way, and today I got something slightly different to give away. I think I probably have more writer keys, but I need to double check on that. So this week, instead, I'm going to give away one of these, if I can pop it up here. Let's see. Let's get it up here. It's the 2D hand-painted tile set bundle. So it's Daniel offered up some of these bundles of these awesome tile sets. So if you're interested in that and winning, all you have to do is choose a race and class to enter the battler for the giveaway, and we'll start that near the end of the show. And then the winner will get a free, pretty cool tile asset. Looks pretty sweet. I'll link that down in the description in just a minute too and drop it in chat so everybody can check it out as well. All right, got that out of the way, and it looks like people are entering and joining the giveaway. So do you guys want to talk more about this, or you want to dive into the game data stuff that we were passing around earlier this week?
You do the game data.
All right, let's pull that up. So there was I don't remember where. I think I stumbled on this on Reddit actually, which is usually where I find like the random Unity related things. And then I sent it out to all of you guys because it reminded me a lot of Jason's story. To be honest, like, I saw it and I was like, oh, this like reminds me a lot of something that Jason's story would create or do. And it's this baking sheet asset. I don't know if it's necessarily an asset. It's a GitHub project. It probably should be an asset store asset. This is assumed, right? But it essentially seems like a way to hook up and create game data in a bunch of different places and then use that in your games with minimal code. Like you just write the logic or that you write the data structure and then it gives you some Google Sheets and you start filling it out, or you put it into CSVs or other formats. So this seemed very interesting and kind of cool. I haven't had a chance to play with it yet, but I want to try like experimenting with it a little bit this week. But it seems like it's just essentially trying to act like a data set or data sheets or database kind of on top of your stuff, so you can just create it anywhere. And I know there are some assets in the asset store that do similar things, so I'm curious what you guys think about this one.
I did say it was funny to me because you didn't mention that you'd said it reminded me of stuff that I do, but I looked at it and my first thought was this is about 85, 90% how I would write this system. So my instinct is pretty much the same thing, which is very funny. And like I said, there was like, I was going through the code going, what would I do differently than I see here? And I saw like two things. Like so much of the code is right down to the way namings work, the boundary line divisions for the different systems. A lot of it's like, yeah, that's pretty much how I'd make a system like this.
Yeah, it seemed a lot like you. It's very modularized, componentized. I cannot get this scaled right, but componentized, and you could just kind of plug in the different systems. It seemed you can plug in Google. And what were the different options? I think there were like 3 or 4 different options for saving.
There's CSV, JSON, yeah.
Oh, and Excel. Yeah. So yeah, it seemed pretty interesting. Also, if anybody in chats use this, I'm kind of curious too. Did you check this one out at all, Andrew?
I did. I haven't dug deep, but I know I had done something with Google Sheets a while ago. I want to say almost 2 years ago, maybe. And I successfully got stuff to and from Google, but I didn't go further than that. But I've always thought maybe I should add that to the game modules, which is, heavy data. So you can edit the data in the editor pretty easily, which is probably why I've never really focused on another way of doing the exact same thing. But I could see value in having a larger data set or having another person being able to edit the data without going into the project and touching things there. So it could be a neat option to look into.
Yeah, I'm gonna try it out myself and see how I like it. I don't have a lot of data to shove into a source like that, but I like to know how well it works and stuff. So that when people are asking, maybe I can recommend it. So that's my thought, at least. And it looks like Midnight was feeling bad for you with this hair system. I saw you were doing a video. Oh. Was that late last night that you were streaming?
It was Friday. I saw the video and I said, "Ooh, I'm gonna do a stream on that. I'm gonna try this out." And so I just set up a stream just like that, and it was all spur of the moment. And it was with the new Unity hair system or hair strand tool or whatever they call it, but the ones they used in their enemies demo. It looks very pretty, and it crashes on the Mac. It just doesn't work on Mac. And I struggled at the beginning because there's no documentation at all. It's just, here it is, you install it and then figure it out. And that's like, I'm like, come on, Unity, you release this brand new thing, you tell everybody to go download it, but you didn't give them at least a hint of a quick start, a hint of a thing. And then of course it just crashes on Mac. All the samples crash on Mac. Once you start trying to use the tool, it crashes on a Mac. It apparently works on Windows just fine, but it doesn't work on the Mac. So maybe somebody forgot to test it on a Mac first.
Oh, that's
or they just didn't
you have a PC though, right?
I do, but it's not connected to the stream and all that.
Oh,
yeah.
You have to get it set up and see if it works.
I know. So disappointing. But if it doesn't work on a Mac, then I can't really use it for my assets as easily because there are Mac users who use my assets, including myself. So
that's true.
I mean, it's one of those things. I get it. Most people don't use a Mac, but there's a decent enough number that just make it work on the Mac too. Make sure it works on the Mac.
Yeah, I wonder what the percentage of people using a Mac is now.
Yeah.
In Unity.
Unity started Mac only, so Roots.
Oh yeah. I remember. I think I got into it when it first opened up to PCs. It's like right around then. We got a lot of questions here. I want to pop up a couple of them real quick. One of them is something I've seen a lot of people talking about in the Discord servers, and it's this asset inventory asset. And they're wondering if you guys have seen the asset inventory that lets you search by name through all your downloaded stuff. And I think at least one of you have talked about this one before, right?
Yeah, I brought it up last week or a couple weeks ago. I haven't used it. It just looked really cool.
Yeah, it came up in a debate on my Discord afterwards, and we were kind of going in, how does it work? What are they doing? And it's like, oh, this is interesting. And yeah, it's got some very clever decisions. It is pretty good. It certainly does more than I thought it did, because it will actually like go through your compressed archives and actually extract a Unity package, find the files, and then let you sort through the contents of them. Which is pretty cool. It's like a lot of other assets don't do that. Not that it's that difficult, by the way. If you're actually curious how to do this, it's like 6 lines of code. At the end of the day, Unity package is an unzippable archive. but it's confusing when you open it because it's done using generated SHA1 hashes. So when you open it, it's like, this is garbage. This isn't a directory structure that I had in my original package, so it can get a bit confusing. But in like 5 lines of code, you can write a thing which will reconstruct back your package structure from your Unity package. So that's what this does. It basically unpacks what was in the Unity package, puts it into I think we saw it was a temp directory somewhere, then lets you sort through the contents of it because it generates icon images. And that was our hint. If it didn't generate icon images, you could have just parsed the contents of it. But the fact that it shows images, which is cool, means they do have to unpack the contents. And to do that, that can be a trade-off for you. If you're checking a load of assets and an asset could be 15 gig for some large modeling asset, you are going to have temp storage on your machine for both the original asset and the unpacked version on your machine for each of the things you're doing. But long story short, it does have a lot of good value in terms of being able to parse through it. If I was to go and do something I did before, is I took all of the audio files from all of the asset packs I owned and I moved them over to Eagle for easier sorting. In retrospect, if I was to do that again, I would use this asset to find all the audio in my other packages, and then I would extract them out into Eagle that way. So I definitely see value in it. I think it's a good asset for what it does. I don't think I would use it for the purpose it's being pitched as, because I just think the actual tooling in and around something like Eagle is better. It's got a lot more features for tagging and sorting, and it's not relying on like a temp directory. It's all sort of unpacked. It's more manual for you to do it that way, but I don't mind putting in the extra manual stuff because I've already written my own tooling around Eagle to automate that side of it if I need to. But if you've got a lot of assets and you're looking for stuff, I'm a big fan. I think it's a well-written asset.
I was muted, but I was saying I need to try that one out. It looks pretty cool. Does it work with none?
Yeah, does it work with none asset store purchases?
I think so. I think I saw you could add directories that weren't asset store. It's not that it won't work with the directories. It's that the selling point is if it's a Unity package, it will also work with that, I think is a better way to put it, which most things won't.
All right, I want to answer a Tilt 5 question real quick. Asked if for the Tilt 5 headset, which is not back there right now because I took it to a friend's house and tore it down temporarily. Need to plug it back in. They want to know if you can purchase extra controllers only or if you need the whole thing. I'm pretty sure it's one headset and a controller paired together. The board is shared, but the boards are relatively cheap. You need a headset and controller for each one. I think they just pair directly up. So I figured get that one out of the way and then ask the big question. Is good software like this standard in the professional game dev space? So it says it's a random question. I was not. I think I misread that. But I guess the question I was wondering is, I'm going to skip that one because I misread it.
Well, then it sounds like you have a question, Jason. What's your question?
My question was, is good code in game development standard? So is that something that do you expect to see good code in game development? Is that normal, or is it bad code, or is it average, or how would you compare it?
You just said, do I expect to see good code in game development? No, I expect to see bad code across the board, preferably. Of course you expect to see good code. Do you expect to see them? Well, I know I'm going to meet loads of bad stuff, but...
Well, it says, it was saying, is it standard? And I would say that it depends on the company. Some companies have really good general coding standards, and the code for the most part is good, and there are some bad parts. Some places the code for the most part is bad, and there are a couple good parts.
I would ask like take any random top tier company, Blizzard or whatever. If you were to open up their code for some big game, fill in the blank, what percentage of that code would you look at from your perspectives and be, ugh, that's weird. Why'd they do that? What's this doing?
If 20% of the code base didn't make my eyes bleed, I'd be surprised. And here's the shocking truth. I think that's fine. I think that's to be expected, because here's I was holding back a rant waiting for everyone else to answer, but the truth is, so you got a bit of a tautology or kind of loaded question when you're talking about is good code X or whatever. It's like, well, what's good code? Like the example would be, is it raining? Is it good to have an umbrella? Sure. If your goal is to not get wet, if you're roasting and it's raining, then you might not want an umbrella because you want cold water, right? So it's hard to say what's good, right? And if I'm to be fair to the question, it's probably one of two things. Good usually means well written. What does well written mean? Usually easy to maintain, easy to read, easy to understand. That's what a category of developers would classify as good. And I usually put myself in that category. But on the other end, you have what is good code? Well, at the end of the day, the best code is the code that does the thing it's supposed to do. And then the better version of that is one that does it efficiently. And so someone else's metric is fast code that does the thing. The only real bad code is code which doesn't do it at once and does it badly and does it slowly. That's probably the only real bad code out there. Now, to get to the real question of in a game company, is it bad code? The short answer is normally yes, if your metrics come from enterprise. If your goal is, I'm looking at my metric of, I come from enterprise software where it's usually finance or something where people take it very seriously if things go wrong, and look at a games company and go, does this code live up to my expectations? The answer is probably not, because you're expecting it to be treated like a banking software, and it won't be. And at first you might be thinking, oh, it's because they're game devs, they're cutting corners, they're doing it fast. No, it's because the goals are different. The goals of banking software is that you don't mind paying the extra cycles to make it bulletproof if that's what needs to be done. In a game, the goal is to write the code, solve the problem, and move on. And so despite my usual reputation of being the guy who's very judgmental on code, I say this all the time. If you ask me, a software architect, what my opinion is on code, I'll give you a software architect's opinion on code, and I will be judgmental about every comma out of place. But if you asked me, is this good enough for my game, and you show me something which works but doesn't have a glaring bug in it, I'll say, yeah, does what you need. There are things which will scale badly, and then I'd ask the question, are you planning on adding DLC to this later? If the answer is yes, well, then you probably want to look at this before you go too far. If the answer is no, it's like, fine, does what it needs to. So that question is hard to answer specifically. But if you talk about big AAA companies, the truth is there's a lot of people in those companies. There's a lot of turnover. And those companies tend to have people that switch out. And so styles of code get written differently. People are in charge of a team and then leave. Another person comes in. Then there's the general the bandage problem, where people will write code that does something, but then they find a bug. And so they start hacking in code to solve the problem. And you might look at that and go, oh, God, they're messing up the code. It was clean before. And now it's messy. Well, it's not. It may be messier, but it's now one less bug in the code base that was very clearly important to fix. And so a naive developer might look at a code base and go, oh my God, this isn't as clean as it could be. Sure, but the clean design that was originally written didn't answer all the questions that were actual requirements of the project. And as the project grew and more requirements were added, the code got messier. Because if you design a perfect pipe system for a house and you all of a sudden realize, oh no, we forgot to have a pipe that goes to the bathroom for water, you hack in a position that solves that problem. It's not as neat as your original design, but it actually solves the problem it was meant to solve. And so code will grow and change. Code will get messier. The bigger the game, the more likely that'll happen. The more people working on it, the more likely that'll happen. The more features on the faster life cycles, the longer that'll happen. And so if the answer is a big game with lots of people that's been around a long time with lots of features added, is it messier than a game that's written by two people in their basement? Probably. And is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. It's a bad thing if a game launches for the first time and it's already a buggy mess. That means it's poor management and they raced through the game development cycle. That's a problem. But if you're talking about a giant game, that's a different story. Now, again, there's reasons why you still want to avoid that too much. A good manager will bake in times for cycling for that, of doing fixes and whatever. But like I said, I think you have to respect the point. The point of games is to make games. And you could have the prettiest code in the world, but if it's not a fun game, nobody cares. No one pays for it. Everyone goes home broke and, companies dissolves. So in a games universe, being forward-facing good is more important. In banking software, nice buttons, but that throws your money to random accounts is bad. So the objectives are diametrically opposed. And so the code will be as good as the code requires. Look at somewhere like NASA. They go through so many cycles of their code that it's like, I think they have, I've got their stats somewhere where they basically talked about how they have like 80 or so different cycles of multiple test systems from different people running different suites, because you don't get to do a debug patch fix when it's in space. So you have to be correct. And so the quality of the code is directly proportional to the objectives you have and how bad or good it has to be.
Yeah, I think that's why my bank websites look like crap and like they're from the 90s, but they work. And I don't want them to be fancy, flashy, and then, like I said, send my money to the wrong place or something else stupid. So it's all very solid points. I actually kind of it reminds me of something else that I wanted to mention too, which is the overthinking and over fixing and optimizing parts of code that just don't fucking matter. I've seen a lot of that recently and just over the years, where people will, especially like junior and intermediate developers, will spend a lot of time focusing on like optimizing and the perfect way to do this one little system that's like 3 seconds of their game. It's like nothing, it's not important, or that the optimization that they're going to make, kind of like you were saying, has zero front end difference. Like it's not going to change the game at all. It's not going to make anything more possible. It's not going to do anything other than make them feel better about how they've restructured that code. And it feels a lot of the time like a waste of time. and it's really hard to push people off of that. So I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that. I'm sure I've done that before in the past too. It's not like I'm immune to it. I can think of many times, specific instances where I spent like an entire day working on one little system, one little thing of code. Didn't matter at all. I just got so entrenched in it, and I was like, well, I can make this better. I can make this better. I can make this better. It's super fast, super optimized. Doesn't matter. Throw it away next week. Right?
In fact, I do that on purpose. I will actively punish myself. If I've been working on code and I work on some code, press play, it works, work on some code, check that it works, work on code. And then if I pause and I start working on code for 40 minutes or 2 hours and I don't ever run the application because I'm just adding features and testing ideas and re-architecting, if I catch myself doing that, I'll be like, you're now just playing. You're not doing work anymore. I will delete the entire thing and start again because I've very clearly gone off on track with whatever I was supposed to be doing. So if I find myself doing that, I will actively say, nope, you just wasted those 2 hours. You're done. You're not getting to use that code. We're going back to solve the problem that you originally had.
Yeah. I like the comment here, call it productive procrastination, refactoring for no reason. But it is important to, I guess, when you're thinking about, hey, this code's not perfect, I want to refactor, it's important to remember that you can just refactor that later when it matters. Like you've got to, I feel like one of the most important parts of being good with code is being able to be comfortable just going back and refactoring things and knowing that you can make changes to stuff without probably destroying your entire project and without total fear, right? Being able to just go in, make something that's a singleton, not a singleton, or adjust the way that some objects are interacting, or totally swap things out without it being a huge deal. I think it's really important to be able to do that at any point in your projects, and it's probably the most valuable skill, at least that I can think of.
Well, that's why I call it like giving myself rope, is that the idea is like you don't have to get it right the first time, but the question is how much further along and how hard will the change be later. So if you're building a house of cards and you decide to change your mind, the bigger the house of cards, the more consequences to changing your mind later. And so what somebody who's doing a good job might do is they'll build a certain stack of house of cards. They'll stop, hang on a second, we're hitting a pivotal point where I may change my mind. Maybe I start building a second stack. Just on the off chance, I've now got enough leeway that if this breaks, this stuff doesn't. And so, like I said in that video I did on change in software, it entirely boils down to architecture shouldn't make your code work. Your code should work without architecture conceptually, without at least over excessive architecture. The point of architecture is to protect yourself from when change will occur in your code. So, like I said, like it may be using a singleton isn't inherently bad. Using a singleton directly in loads of public places is really bad because now the act of using it has cascading side effects you don't understand. But if you use a singleton in a class and then call a method in that class that uses the singleton, you've now got one place to change it and all the subsequent ones don't. So it's not about the actual thing itself. It's about how much of a ripple effect would this be to change later. And so it's purely, to me, that's the most important thing, is giving yourself that leeway to correct things later. And that's why I don't bother with this stuff. Like we had that debate in my Discord and it was just a funny moment of, I threw out an example of people spend ages on stuff like a save system. And then one of the guys in the Discord was like, hey, but I haven't found a save system I like yet. I'm like, Well, that's the point. That's you just prove the point. Just make the thing that does the save. And if it doesn't do it well enough yet, move on. And then if it turns out you really need more features, then add a feature to it. And now, if you don't like it anymore, refactor it a bit. And like, you don't make the perfect system. You make the system, and then as features get added, suddenly it doesn't look like it needs to look anymore until you change it. And perfect isn't like the correct answer in every project. It's what does this project need? And the way you find the answer to that is you write more project until you find out more needs, and then you make it look like what this project needs it to be. So you iterate by actually doing things, not by guessing on things you might need later.
Anyone else got thoughts on this one?
My game, The Barbarian, had terrible code, but it worked. So, it didn't crash too much.
Most games do have some pretty terrible code in them, I think. So, and they still work. Although I'm sure Dave's games have nice, pretty code.
Always.
Just looking at Dave. Always organized. The one thing that I'll guarantee though is that Dave's code is always has a fucking comment at the top.
Fuck yeah, it does.
There's always a comment at the top. Who
my
wrote
code
that.
is readable.
Yes.
Like, that's one of the most important things in this when you're writing code in GameDev. Like, you have tons of code at the end of the day. Can you find where the thing went wrong? Can you read what it's doing? Can you do it? Like, looking at this question right here, refactoring for no reason. Remember, a good reason to refactor is if you're on a team making it readable. Like, you bang the thing out and it works, and you're like, this is awesome. Make sure somebody else, when you leave the company or get hit by a bus, can read that code. Like,
yeah, for me, it's also if I don't know what it does when I look at it right away. If I go back to it and I look at the code, I'm like, wait, what is this doing? Then I'll probably refactor it so that it's easier for me to absorb that right away, so that I can just look at it and know, at least from the variable names, what it is that it's doing.
I'd even say with the readability thing, that to me is the only thing that matters, which might be overkill. But I would say there's a lot of code out there which starts to get disgustingly complicated for the simplest tasks. I've mentioned before how if you want to delete to recycle bin in C#, you have to import Visual Basic and start referencing pointers and doing crazy stuff. It's like, I just want to delete to recycle bin. So that's the truth of how it works. Or another example is I had a project in Unity where I wanted to list all weapons in a project. Now, I wanted to do it in a smart way. I didn't have to go, these were like weapon classes. It was a whatever kind of game. So to do that, it's like, I use reflection and find all things which implement this in this assembly. That is I don't care. What I want to do is say, get me all weapons. And so what's more important than the code you chose to write to get the answer is if you had a line of code that said weapons.get all, then it doesn't actually matter what you pick to solve that problem, because the intention is written directly in the code. And if someone comes along and doesn't know what the code does, but they know what the code's trying to do, they know another way to achieve the same goal, they could just rewrite your code to do a way that makes sense for them, but still does the thing that the code says it's trying to do. So more important than implementation is the contract. Like this, so many times do I say this in my Discord, and so many debates over what I mean by this has come up, and I keep saying it. The implementation doesn't matter. What matters is that the actual contract, your intent, is there. If the code says, if this happens, save file. If file has been modified outside, don't read file. Otherwise, use default save file. It's like, hey, but what if it's JSON, or what if it's XML, or what if they hack it using this? I told you what I'm trying to do. If you know a better way to do it, just rewrite the bits and the methods, but the description of what the intention of this code is there, always will be there, and isn't the problem. So more than anything else, if the code explains what it's trying to do, all the other bits can change, and the code will still make sense later, every time.
So yeah, I put lots of comments in my code.
Yeah, yes, you do. That's good though, I guess. Kind of.
I also write wikis for a lot of the stuff I write.
I don't do it very often. I'm starting to, but it's only because I personally hate comments and I hate wikis for code, but I understand other people like them, and I understand they are valuable for certain kinds of things. Like, especially if I'm writing code to be consumed, you're not going to get any of that stuff from me. But if I'm writing code to learn from, I will go and explain the reasoning behind various different bits. I consider it a point of that. My one personal point of like, you should be able to use my code by making a best guess about where I'd put something. I like to think if I hand someone code I've written, they'd go, what would Jason call the high score thing? High score. Okay, cool. Said, okay, where did he put the thing to save player data? Say player. player say player.say. Okay, there we go. Like you should be able to intuit it, and if you can't, I've screwed up somewhere else. It shouldn't need comments. If it does need comments, bigger question. But yeah. That being said, to figure out how I'd approach that, I will put comments in for like the stuff on my GitHub all has comments there and wiki stuff. But like that, if I'm giving someone code, I would give sample projects that demonstrate how it works, and it should be intuitive, I would hope.
Extending from that, folder structure in your Unity project. If all your code is under one folder called scripts and one folder called editor, and it's just a massive list, yeah, don't do that. Put folders in.
And if you have no namespace, I swear to God, if I download an asset that has no namespace, I will probably delete it. Like if I'm feeling like fine, I'll give it a try. I'll put it in my own assembly directive or whatever. But I swear, if I download code from somebody and there's not even just namespace your name at the top of it, I'm probably not going to use it. Or I might, which people don't like, cut the code and move it into my namespace. Because the truth is, if I need your damn code, I'm going to like cut the bits, rewrite it, and use it my own way, because I'm not going to use your thing, which is going to conflict. Especially if you call your stuff item or save
object.
or something. My God, yeah.
Object is the worst. Everybody makes an object class and then they don't namespace it. Like, are you trying to piss me off? And building library, if you don't have a namespace around your library that you're bringing into everything, you are a horrible human being.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love them. By the way, you can have namespaces that have extensions on it, like warpedimagination.math, warpedimagination. You can. They don't just have to be under one single namespace. That's also a big no-no. Like, be nice. Be nice.
Can you make them like UnityEngine.David?
You can abstract the Unity stuff and start playing around with that if you really want to. But yeah, no, not UnityEngine.David. That's a very bad one. Yeah, don't use your name. Like, why are you using your name in your namespace? That's not telling me anything about.
I'm just going to use Jason without the A from now on.
I don't mind if somebody has.
JSON
I don't mind if somebody has a name and then they put what the thing is, what the library is, what the section of code, like, oh, it's avatar, it's interactions or whatever. That's cool. Like, have your name, put something else there. But if your namespace is just your name and nothing else, like, please, you're not that important in the world.
To be fair, I do that sometimes, but I have my core library, and I don't expect you to use the core library. It should be JSON story dot extensions or dot whatever, but there's going to be core stuff in the JSON story bit that makes sense to be shared. But that's my defense of that particular approach.
Okay.
So another follow-up question on that Tilt 5 I wanted to answer about whether or not you can get the rotation and position of the head and stuff compared to the table. This thing works a lot like the HTC Vive or the other VR headsets. You essentially get like an object there that is the head that has the position, rotation, and all of that matches up for the cameras. And then you had another controller, and you can just track that and the axes on it really easily. So yes, the answer to that one was just a quick, simple yes, I guess. Let's see, there were a couple more questions in here that I had saved off that I wanted to pop up. So this one was about certifications and getting jobs. They're wondering if getting a certification is good to get employed as a game developer. So we're talking a little bit earlier about getting first game dev jobs. And personally, I've seen the certifications be helpful for getting people past the kind of like first gate, the front door, when they don't have any job experience, but not a whole lot beyond that. You know, after that, it comes down to the technical part. But if you already have job experience, then it's probably less exciting and less useful. Have you guys, is it something you guys ever look at when you're looking at positions and hiring, or?
No.
It's about as valuable to me as someone being well-dressed in a video interview. It's like, nice. They put some effort in.
So if you see on a resume, it's like, okay, but it's not going to sway you.
Yeah, for me, it doesn't sway me either way, but like it does. I think it gives a lot of people the confidence to actually go out and apply for the jobs. I know that the HR people, though, I've seen many times where they get HR people and management that aren't technical get excited about that because it's like an obvious, just like it's a stamp, right? a
Yeah,
stamp
and
of approval from Unity.
And I'll put that for, I mean, a lot of times companies will ask for a Unity certification now. It's starting to become more popular. It kind of comes and then it goes away when nobody applies because nobody took the Unity certification. Like, okay, let's remove that because we need people to actually apply for this job. It's for me, if you've got a Unity certification, you're still going to be tested. You're still going to be asked questions. It's not an automatic pass. But it's also not an automatic disqualification if you don't have it. But Jason's right. If you're applying to a very large company, then you will go through HR. If they've put it on the thing that says you have to have Unity certification, the HR person is going to check you have Unity certification. I have been asked if I have a Unity certification when I've got in for a job before. This in the last 3 years. And I was like, I do not have a Unity certification. I've been using Unity for over 12 years. And it's like,
no, but I helped write one of the tests.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And this is the thing too, is like, here's the brutally honest truth, is anybody who has been following Brackeys for a year, you'll be able to pass the Unity certification. If you've used Unity and can find the you find the animator tab and like move some stuff around and know what a collider and rigid body is, you can at least get that first pass quite easily. So it's not going to be as difficult as you think it is for most of this stuff. So if you feel like
programmer one is a little bit harder than that, though. The one they're talking about here, that's the if I'm not screwing up my tiers here, that's like the second one. There's the associate one that's it's like, can you use the editor, do very, very basic code. And the programmer one was like probably, I think, like a 2-year level, like intermediate, where you know some code. You get it, it's all code from what I remember, or largely code. I think it was like 70%.
I guess to show my ignorance, I haven't taken it myself, but I took the Udemy course that was the Unity sponsored certified how to pass that certification course. And I skimmed through that and went, okay, I get what this stuff is, because like I said, I don't feel the need to put a banner on my resume, but I do want to make sure I'm not missing something obvious that would be expected. So I skimmed through that, and from what I could see, it's like, can you use Unity effectively? And if you're using Unity, you'll know how to use Unity, you know.
It does show a level of effort if you've gone out and you've done the Unity certification. So we're not completely dismissing it. It's there. It does show you've done some effort. And when I'm about to give you your Unity test, if I've seen you've done the Unity certification, it gives me a little bit more confidence about the fact that what I'm about to do for you, especially if you're coming in as a junior or mid-level, you're not going to fail abysmally. But yeah,
I think if you can pass,
I see somebody saying you have to renew it. I didn't even realize you had to renew it every year.
I'll be honest. If we're talking about how much value we put on it, if you've got one from 4 years ago and one from yesterday, I'm going to give them equal weight. I don't care. They mean nothing to me. Like, Unity does change every 48 hours, but it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, if you use Unity, you'll have to get accustomed to the constant shifting sound anyway. That just because if you took an updated version from last month, you're already still out of date in Unity land. So there's not really much. That's not going to sway too much, you know.
They don't change that much from version to version either. I mean, they change and gets updated, but it's still the core same knowledge. Right? It's the main things that you need to know stay the same. So,
it might be a good way for certain people to work out what they're missing.
Oh, without a doubt, yeah, you'll definitely find out what you don't know if you don't pass it, or even if you do pass it. I think you can pass it like a 70 or 80. You still find out all the stuff that you don't know and need to focus on.
I truly believe, I think it's more of a confidence boost. I think a lot of people out there, like, I've talked to people who are like, oh God, I have no idea. I don't know if I could even be hired as a junior. And like, this person has made like 4 pretty large Unity projects. I'm looking at them going, if I was making a team, I'd probably hire you as a senior, but they have no concept because they've never applied for anything. They're just working on their own stuff. And so there's a lot of people out there, just try it. Just, you'd be surprised. Like, I genuinely don't think that there's as much of a chasm as people think, you know.
Let's go on to a different job related one. What boundaries on the yearly salary should you expect when applying for junior game dev jobs? You guys got thoughts on this? I think it'd be interesting because I know Jason's numbers are going to be way different from Dave's numbers. So what would you expect a junior game dev, Dave, to come in at or start looking for? They want to start getting in first game dev job.
haven't hired a junior dev in a little while. So, okay. So when I pick a salary, I go and look at what everybody else is trying to hire somebody at that level for. I look at my budget. I work out what other hires I'm going to be doing for the particular project or the particular company. And then I do the spreadsheet and work out whether that's going to work. And it does give me levels between middle and junior and senior that I want to bring into that company. But I go and do a pass on loads of companies that are hiring, have just hired. What are they hired for? Make a couple of phone calls to some friends and ask them what they're doing. Then I put the actual amount out, because it's been bouncy, to say the least, especially with remote. Like, remote has changed the game completely, and you're seeing salaries all over the place at the moment for various jobs. So I don't have an answer to this at the moment, because I just haven't hired. I've been hiring artists more than I've been hiring programmers and designers recently, because I have my programmers.
I'm extremely glad you couched that as well as I intended to. So nice. Yeah, the truth is, I don't want to give a good answer to that either, because if I'm being brutally honest, I've often worked at companies which did the hiring, and I helped with the interview process, but it wasn't my budget. I would tell them to whatever money you're willing to give to give me the best people I can hire, all the better. If I'm hiring somebody personally to work on a project, the brutally honest truth is I don't have a lot of personal income to be spending on hiring. And so what I do, though, is I do relatively expensive consulting and contracting. And so if I hire people, I'm going to be effectively one-on-one working with them on things. And I will say bluntly to them, like, I'll pay you enough to keep you happy. But the truth of the matter is, we'll work together. You'll come out of it learning a lot. And, well, I may not take an offer like that myself. If people are interested, that's usually what I'll offer. As for actual values, again, there are websites that track this. I would never even, the companies are going to hire you based on what region you're from, or whether you're going to move, what your cost of living will be where you are. There's a lot of variables to the point where it's not really even worth considering. If you're looking for ballpark numbers, you can literally go from 8K to 90K, entirely depending on where you are. It's insane. So that's kind of why it's a useless sort of metric to give a value to. I would say you probably look at, I don't know, 20 to 30,000 in Ireland if you're kind of starting out with something. But again, it's hard to know between games versus standard software versus what the company looks for. And like I said before, a lot of companies will hire you as a graduate, and that's like the key word there is graduate developer, with the expectation where, honestly, if you can tie your shoes, you're fine, because what they want is for you to be able to come in and they will teach you. If you're not going to be a liability and you can promise to work for 2.5 years for them, they'll train you enough to do the job. And so they'll often pay you quite little, but then, it'll be consistent. So it really depends. There's absolutely no, there's no good answer.
Yeah, the last couple of big companies I've built teams for, they've been at completely different. One's been up in Canada, one's been over on the East Coast, and they're vastly different salaries as well. Especially with Canada, the one was actually in a games hub area, so the people being hired were going to be paid more than, funnily enough, the people in the southeast of America, where it's not a games hub, and they wanted local people coming into the office for particular reasons I can't go into. But yeah, they weren't hiring remote at that time.
Yeah, I just pulled up one of the millions of search results that I found for game dev job salaries. I was kind of curious, and it seems like they're, for the US at least, they're right around where I thought. And this says under 3 years, so that 72,000 is not like the minimum starting. That's probably, the 2 year, right in the middle range. And
that 6+ is too low.
What's that?
6+ is too low. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. I think that's probably the average there too of the 3 to 6, right? So that's probably really like the 4.5 year range or 4 year range, which I could see there. At 6, it's definitely going to get higher though. And then, 6+ at 105. And that's of course going to vary a lot from region to region, I'm sure too.
Yeah, like I've literally seen companies where they have 3 employees doing the same job, and there's 90K difference between them just because the country they're in.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who they adjust the salaries based on the area that they're in, and people are fine with it because they know that the other guy that's working with them has to pay $2,000 more for rent because the cost of living is so much higher or something.
Yes, some people are. Personally, I roll my eyes a little bit at that. I don't see that as a good justification, especially in a day and age where people can work remotely anywhere. I don't think the idea that someone chose to live in a more expensive place is a good justification for extra pay. But that's a philosophical debate.
It's fair.
That's where it gets difficult when you grew up in that expensive place. So moving away means leaving your friends and family.
Or you moved by the beach in Southern California because it's really,
If you
really nice.
chose to move from cold England to the beach.
I take offense to that because I moved to a really, really expensive area because it's right by the beach. It's beautiful.
Yeah, right down there. Yeah, it is a very, very nice area. And I was like, where all the was it like the 5 of the top social media companies all formed there? Like on your block,
Oculus formed just down the road. It's crazy.
It's like right.
And then they all moved to San Francisco because investors.
Well, just to be particularly clear here, because it's coming up in the chat, what I'm saying is there is a fundamental difference between living in America versus living in the middle of Silicon Valley versus having an apartment that's like 5 buildings down from Grand Central Station. I'm not saying you have to leave the country you're in. I'm saying there are people who will move to the most central Silicon Valley hub where the cost of their living costs more than an annual entire cost of living in Ireland for everything. And then, it's one thing to be in that situation, but then you're lamenting that the level of extra income you have is quite low. The fact is, for a lot of people, if you move so much as 2 hours away in some direction because it's not as desirable a place to live, sure, you have more of a cost for coming into work, but that's the thing. In a job where you have to be in person, different story. If your job is most days sitting at your computer most of the time, moving 2-3 hours out of town can literally half the cost of living. America's slightly different in some cases, but London, this is a very big deal. There are people who live in the middle of London City who are paying 2 times as much for cost of living than to take 40 minutes outside of town where they could just have a nice house twice as big, pay half the cost of rent, and then just get a bus into town when they need to or drive in. So my point is, it's not
did that and my wife complained. I literally lived an hour and a half outside London, and then my wife had to commute one day and she went, no. So we ended up living in central London. We had a nice house and it had a garden and stuff, but yeah. Jesus.
No, what I'm saying is the choice is fine. You can do it. But I will not respect.
Don't argue about it, yeah.
Exactly. I'll not respect. Oh God, the cost of living is so big. Oh yeah, but you're getting paid 3 times more than the person right next to you. I don't care. Like if you choose, that's the choice you want to make, where you're going to pay that much extra rent for having that extra access to resources up close. You've made a choice. Live with your choice. Is all I'm saying.
I remember I went up to meet a load of investors up in Palo Alto, and I remember just going to coffee shops, and everybody in there was writing code and stuff like that. I was like, I'm with my people. I must move to this location. Yeah, it's not cheap in Palo Alto.
No, I think you would double your cost again.
Yeah, from where I am, which is ridiculous. Yeah, and I live right by one of the nicest
I was
beaches
thinking
in the US.
You're about probably double the cost of where I am, about 2 hours out. It's funny because Jason said 2 hours out cost half. It's almost exactly. I think I'm like an hour and a half from Dave, and it's probably half the cost of living here. Yeah, and then I don't know how many hours from Jason, and I feel like it's like 1/10 the cost of living there.
Well, especially with the euro at the moment.
Yeah.
Good time to visit Europe if you're in the US because the euro's right down.
Oh yeah, it's definitely plummeted, and it's nice and warm for once. You can actually go out there and not freeze to death.
It's unpleasantly warm, and they don't have air conditioning. It's not nice.
True. We don't have air conditioning. That is definitely a problem. Plus, housing is very hard to find. Like it may be cheaper, but you'll actually be in a long time trying to just find a damn place. If you're looking for a house right now, I'm not kidding when I say there's been last time I looked to get a rental for a house, we went to the letting agents and they were like, we're having 600 people see this place in the next 2 weeks. And it's like, cool. Do I even have a chance? It's like, I wouldn't bother. And it's like, okay. So finding a place that would accept you alone is enough of an issue. So Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Maybe it's time for you to move to the United States, Jason.
Maybe. I just need a good enough offer, I guess.
Join the dark side.
But if I do, I will try to move a few hours out of town, is all I'm saying.
You're going to find out like next month, Jason's living in downtown Palo Alto. Like
Yeah,
right
coffee
down.
Eating my
shop,
words.
building.
Yeah.
He's got a penthouse above the Unity building.
Complaining about the cost of like, oh, my apartment is so expensive, you guys. You don't understand.
$10,000 a month for my closet. It's probably about accurate out there.
That is accurate.
Like by the Unity office, I can only imagine. Like you've got to make at least a couple million a year to be able to live in a small place there.
You can make less than that, but yeah. I mean,
I don't know.
starting salaries are crazy in Palo Alto right now. Like I'm not talking about my particular level, but at junior and stuff like that, they're just starting salaries are huge. And it seems really attractive, and people get really attracted to them. But as Jason says, you then move there, and you're like, "Oh my god, yeah, all my salary just went."
Yeah, my rent's $8,000 a month.
Yeah, exactly. Probably
Wait,
more than that now.
The one thing I will say though, it gives you the flexibility to skimp and save, and if you're able to find if you're able to live cheaper and you don't mind a little bit of a commute, or you don't mind living with too many people and on top of each other or something, then you're able to squirrel away some of that extra cash and you'd be in a better position. So.
I would say
people. Counterpoint to that too is I found that in my case, so I briefly worked for a company in New York and they had me up there, and so the money you're being paid, there's something to be said for if you work in a large company. There is a socialness to it, and there's a case where some of it's optional. Some of it's not really. If you intend to really take your job seriously, you have to be at the right places, meet out with people, and go hang out. And so I'll be honest, a large portion of my squirreled away money that would have happily gone into my bank balance while I was there went out to Japanese jazz visits and burgers at 2 a.m. and drinking sessions, which I probably wouldn't have gone for by myself. But you kind of have to do that to be in on the game and to have fun and meet people and just to actually like be on the radar of the right people. So there's something to be said for it's not just the cost of the rent and what you're doing. Cost of lifestyle is genuinely a lot more expensive. It can be depending on what you're doing. So,
very true. And Nicholas asked if you think it's worth moving to a larger city to find more opportunities if you have funds. I think this is kind of an interesting thing because for me, like I've got an army of kids, and one of the things that keeps me from moving to one of those places that Jason mentioned that's like further out in the middle of nowhere where it's dirt cheap and I could buy like a Warren Buffett mansion for $100,000, or like a moat around the whole place, is just that the kids eventually have to grow up and have some opportunities. And as you get further out, those disappear more and more. And Dave was in London and Andrew been in San Francisco. So I'm sure you guys see constantly the benefit of the opportunity there. And I see it just being around LA and San Diego all the time. Like there's this versus like Washington State where I was before. Like it's night and day the amount of different things and opportunities that there are, the companies that are there, the events and the things that are going on where you can meet and actually get into the different industries. It's not even close. So I think that it can be worthwhile. I don't know that just randomly moving, like I don't know how that works, like what the right way to do that is, but I think that being in an area that's good, like full of opportunity, makes a big difference. But then again, that's just my experience. So you guys,
I would say, I know a lot of people. Like I knew some guys who were Irish guys working for a big corporation that had like wings over here in Ireland that would then send people over to the various offices in London, America. And they were like angling to get over to those offices. So once you're in and you get over there, and once you start being in that life cycle, it's very easy to parlay that to other jobs. And then you're golden, right? You've set a precedent. You've got a good salary. You're in a good location. That's fine. I think there's a problem with the mindset of moving to a place to hopefully get yourself a good job there, because now you're paying all of the downsides, but you're getting none of the benefits. So you were better off, in my opinion, of ingratiating yourself into a situation where you can get an offer of a work visa or something to go over. Once you're in, then you're golden. But I wouldn't go over to begin looking for work, or you'll end up like one of the millions hordes of wannabe actors who are serving you breakfast at the local restaurant. They were just, don't worry, I'll make it someday, because you're paying a fortune just to exist, which is a horrible way to live, you know?
Yeah, don't move to a big city if you haven't got a job there yet and think you're going to do it. Especially with the way COVID's just made every interviewer comfortable with remote interviewing. Like, you can interview remote for most of these jobs now, and then
You might
at
be
least
able
for
to
the
work
first
remote.
or even second interview, before you have to make the journey in. Always cost up where you're moving to. I mean, going back to that Palo Alto example, cost up where you're moving to, what the utilities cost when you look at the salary you're about to get if you have to be near there. Because, yeah, that salary might look huge, but you're going to be a pauper because they're going to charge you a fortune to live there.
And
So always make those guesses.
small thing as well, if you are moving somewhere, make sure at the state of the interview process, if they're talking about moving you as part of the job, make sure you figure out what the rules are there before you do it, because some places will be quite nice and arrange to help you move and pay the fees for that. Others, they might be giving you a high salary when you get there, but it might cost you pretty much half your savings or more just to get to the place with whatever stuff you intend to bring with you. So be very upfront with whoever you're hiring with to say, look, there's going to be costs. We have to figure this out together. And to them, it's usually a drop in the bucket. If they're going to hire you for years, to them, it's usually not a big deal. But if you don't say anything early, you could screw yourself.
Yeah, if they don't offer some relocation bonus and it's like a good, like high paying position, I would ask for it after you get that offer. Say, hey, you just can get a little bit of relocation bonus for the movement stuff, because that is expensive. I mean, expect anywhere from up to like $5,000 or more. Usually, like I remember at Sony, they I think they gave exactly $5,000 was like the limit for moving for relocation. But I mean, that's assuming that you got a whole family in a house that you're moving. And I don't know, it's probably gone up in cost since then, because that was back in the olden days.
Not the olden days. Stop making me feel old. We were at Sony at the same time. It's no.
Back in pointy Tomb Raider times.
In the previous century.
Oh, okay. Let's see. So, yeah, but overall, I think that it is important. There is value in being in places like this. I don't know that it's worth it to just move there, but there's also only value if you take advantage of it. If you live in a place that has lots of events and things and you don't ever attend or go to them, then you're not getting that value out of it. Like, one of the things I try to do is go to as many things at the LA Convention Center that are game dev related as possible, because it's so damn close. Like, I may as well go check it out. Like, it's an opportunity that not everybody has, and it's a small cost for me. So try to take all those, or the meetups that are in person and stuff like that. So I think it's important to make sure you do this.
I think you nailed it there, because I think so. People have been commenting how I sound very utilitarian in my outlook on this stuff, and it seems impractical. Well, I'll put it this way. All you've got in life is your resources. Your resources might be your skills. They might be your finances. They might be your, age / health or whatever. So you have to look at your resources and spend them wisely. If you are, if you're trying to figure out how you're going to move somewhere, spending those resources or costs without any gain is kind of a bad idea. If you're going to go to a place that's its benefits are there's a lot of stuff going on, and you choose to move there, it had better be because you're trying to avail of the resources that are there. If you're going to move there and then not use those resources, then it's a waste of your resources. And if your resources are your skills and your money, and you're spending your money and getting nothing for it, that just seems like a pretty silly idea to me. And so my point is that a lot of people don't realize that the resources of having a computer that is connected to the internet and a chair is actually a lot of resources. And if you want to, you can learn a lot of things, put up all of the content, build online stuff and examples and projects, and meet people and join Discords and join communities, and all of the stuff you need to do to build up your profile as a developer. There are some things that are better in person. You will definitely have a fast track in certain areas if you meet people at the right meetups and do whatever. But if you're going to the meetups and you've got no online presence and you've got no skills, it doesn't matter how many meetups you go to. And so you don't need to be in a fancy place to sit at a computer, build projects, and put them online. So I'm not saying that there's no value in meetups and locations and high-value places and high-salary locations, but these are all things that you have to leverage. And if you don't have the tools to leverage them, it's kind of wasting everybody's time to go there. So if that's usually, I guess, to be cynical, the kinds of people asking those questions don't have all the other stuff first. So if your questions are, oh, should I go in here and do this? How about first you go and learn a bunch of stuff, make some projects online, build an online profile and portfolio, then come back to me with a question, and you'll be in a much better position to have an answer that's more relevant to, given the skills I have, how do I leverage them to meet the right people, to go to the right places and get the jobs I want? If you're starting with nothing and your first port of action is to spend all the resources you have to go to a place, it's probably not going to work out well for you. That's all I mean.
I will say, one, for those of you who like to have side gigs, and I think a lot of game devs probably are okay with some side gigs, the asset store, if you're living in a lower cost area, you can sell stuff on the assets for the same prices that people in high cost areas sell assets for. And you'll just make a hell of a lot more return on that transaction. So certainly, I can't live full time as an asset store publisher right now in where I am. But if I were to move to a lower cost area, I'd be probably okay. I'd be fine. But
waiting for Andrew to move to Thailand one day.
I'm not moving to Thailand, but I do know that there are quite a few asset store publishers who did move from higher cost areas to someplace like Thailand or somewhere similar, and they are living a great life because they just make assets all day and their cost of living is really small and there's a beach. You just have to be okay with living in Thailand. But if you're already living in a place and you got your family there, you got your friends, you're not realistically going to move, then it is not a bad idea. You can make a little extra money, and that little extra money will go a lot further for you than it will for someone in a high cost area.
Speaking of high costs, I like the market mentioned that one of the things to look at is the taxes too, because some places have very different taxes. I don't know what it's like in Ireland. I always thought that Ireland was like you just don't get taxed.
They don't pay tax.
Everybody goes there.
No, trust me.
Anything.
My accountant regularly reminds me I pay tax and I pay accountancy fees as well. So let's just say a few thousand does leave my account on a semi-regular basis, which I don't know.
You have to be Jeff Bezos if you don't want to pay tax in Ireland.
Although here's a fun, really frustrating thing about Irish taxes. If you're paying VAT on something and you want to get your tax back, the way they distribute that is they divide it by 8 and you get an eighth of it back each year for the next 8 years. So if I buy a big fancy computer, it costs me 3,000 to 5,000 or something to do my work, I'm not getting my VAT back on that. I'm getting that divided by 8, distributed over the next 8 years. So that's fun. And that happens for all of my larger purchases. So that's really annoying. Yeah.
It's no fun. All right, so there was a question from Lovebird about when is the next Gather Mixer. That was the meetup that we did on the 1st, and the next one is going to be on the 1st of the next month. So I just decided I'll just keep it at the 1st, and we'll see how that goes. Maybe change it to a steady day, but let's see what it's like just doing the 1st of each month. It might be a little bit weird in January, but every other 1st should be fine. And that way to keep it nice and simple. So the next one will be on the 1st, same time, 5 p.m. Pacific. I forget what time that is everywhere else, but I'm sure there's a calculator out there. And this is a question that's come up a couple times before. I wanted to pop it up. It was about visual scripting because it reminded me that I keep forgetting to put up the visual scripting talk from GameDev Guild. That's like the one that I wanted to do. There was a tiny bit of editing I wanted to put at the beginning, some cool stuff, and I keep forgetting to do it. So I got to do that this week. So visual scripting. Do you guys include visual scripting in your workflow at all, or do you ever use or do any visual scripting? And if so, where? Dave's shaking his head yes, like he does do some visual scripting.
Do shaders count? Is that a...
Yes. Shaders count. The mechanism system counts.
Okay, is that generally where you find that?
Yeah, I have my own as well. I have a system for game flow and a system for AI. So when the AI needs to be like a brain sort of AI. So when I'm doing that sort of thing, like a big state machine that goes all over the place, I use visual elements for that. Because one, it's easier for the designers that work for me to come in and work with those. I don't have to code those things up every time. And two, I just find it more modular in some of the stuff I do and easier to go back because I build bigger games and stuff like that. So it's not going to be just a very small indie that has a small little AI loop or anything like that. So if I want my guy to come out and he gets shot at, he ducks behind cover, takes time to duck behind cover, does his reloading in cover, then comes out, shoots at you, or walks into the room, aims at you if you've got a gun in your hand, or doesn't aim at you if you haven't got a gun in your hand. You start programming that out. It starts to get messy. So I build a visual graph that I work on. That's very much like the Mechanim system to go through. And I'm a component of the Mechanim system. I use it quite a lot.
Nice. So primarily for AI then as like the big use case or the most obvious use case?
And flow.
Honestly,
so,
flow, literally workflow and state.
Yeah, game flow. Like if when my game starts up, it says, "Is this the first time somebody's played the game? Do this," and that's all in a flow. All just nodes coming in and going through, and then it goes right. You're going into the tutorial. Like there's a tutorial bit. If I say to somebody, "Pick up the gun," in the tutorial, and they don't pick up the gun, then it goes into a timer. Have they picked up the gun? No. Tell them to pick up the gun again. Timer. They still haven't picked up the gun. Boot up an AI bot that kills them. You should have picked up the gun. Puts them back to the start. Pick up the gun. That sort of flow, if you're writing that in code and building that out, or some structure in a scriptable object or something like that, that can be really complicated to go in and make changes to or to play with or anything like that. You probably end up having this thing with an array of do this, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. Go-to statement, do this, do this, do this. Go-to statement. Like, no, I'm building that in a visual graph. Just for me, it's my personal preference on how I do it. It's the way I found designers work best with the tools and the utilities I provided.
It also means you can hand it off, which is a huge deal.
Yeah,
exactly. Like, I'll be honest, I prefer writing it in code. No go-to statements, though. Personally, I use a Fluent builder of some description. But as much as I enjoy doing that, I know that I've tethered myself to this system for future because I'll be the only person able to modify it. And so if something is going to be used by someone else, or I perceive a point in future where changes will need to be made to this that I don't want me doing, then I will take into account a way to do that as some kind of building tool. But I think something to point out is you said you make your own tools for that, right? And I would probably put myself in the same category because if you use off-the-shelf ones, not that you can't, but if you use them out of the box as they are, they're just a glorified wrapper on code, and it becomes equally as messy just now with lines and boxes. If you are going to use visual scripting, take the time to build your own nodes for things. For the love of God, don't write your code as a series of vectors .add, .set, .add, .set, .where, .this. It's like just write nodes and control the flow with the states. Don't write the code with the states.
Yeah, exactly. And I did write my own, and that's because a lot of the stuff, I get into some trouble with this when I'm talking about tutorials and some of the other things where I'm like, I have this, and somebody's like, why are you using this particular system? A lot of times I'm not, because of the fact I wrote it before the system actually existed, because I've been doing this for so long. Like somebody asked me what's my VR interaction system, because it has hand blending when it picks up objects and things like that. And I turned around and said, it's my own system because there wasn't a VR interaction system when I wrote it, and I keep it up to date. The only time I would change that out is if something comes out that's got a dedicated team working on it and it's more feature filled, then I might move it out. Not on a production project, obviously, but on a brand new project I'm going to work in, then I will move that out to take on a different system. If it does more, and it's better, it's fully rich, I know it's going to be continued, and it integrates nicely. But no.
And it's worth saying there's a lot of stuff these days too, right? Like the point was, it's the same thing. It's like a lot of the early code I wrote to deal with switching between Oculus and Vive and stuff was a nightmare. These days, there's a lot of like nice systems you can use.
Yeah.
You just don't need to waste all of your time doing that.
Yeah, like I had my own input system wrapped around the Unity input system, and I don't do that anymore. I've got rid of that because I like the new input system that Unity's put in there, controversial as it may be, but I actually quite like it. But I've still got a wrapper around it, obviously, because I use wrappers for an awful lot of the work I do, because I then bring in like analytics, but I have a wrapper that sits in front of that because I'm not going to use some third-party one, because I'm going to use some third-party one for one. I'm going to use some third-party for another. A lot of my clients want a particular analytics system, so I have a third-party unit for that. But yeah, my node system is literally I have my own window. I produce my own graphics for it, and the connectors, the tethers before it, the transitions. I write my own code for the visualization on that as well to do it. And then it's slightly abstracted outside of that because a lot of that visual stuff obviously just disappears off because it doesn't get produced with the game engine. This is all laying out some nice code, some nice data set in the background that then goes out with the actual game. It obviously doesn't use the visual graph when it goes out with the game because that's the Unity editor all over the place and those libraries don't compile into real time. So that's why I have them. There you go.
I think if you want a really good example of this, there is a dev working on a game, Extortion, the YouTube channel. I don't know if you know that one. I've never seen someone do a better example of the back and forth relationship. So let me give this a link here. It can be very hard if you've never worked on a system like this to go, how much work should I put into my tooling versus stuff I use versus how much whatever. This channel is a good example of, to be honest, a very skilled developer that's probably above a lot of people's willingness to put their own custom tooling in. But this channel, I've never seen someone talk about it so bluntly, is like, these are tools I wrote to make my own level stuff or my own systems for AI or how I deal with facts for my dialogue system. And they've built their own tools that are very clear and demonstrative of what they're doing. And it highlights exactly that. It's like, when is it worth your time to do it? Well, when it saves you time to do it. And if you're a talented enough dev or you've been doing it long enough or you have an existing base library of UI components, you can leverage things like the graph stuff to make quick level tools or whatever. So yeah, I'd recommend having a look at that as an example of a practical, how do you walk that line?
Just
I'll check them out, actually.
I subscribe
I love
myself.
tools developers.
Yeah, although annoying, their stuff is like, I'm so jealous. Like, it's so cleanly written, beautiful examples, great videos. It's frustratingly talented. Very annoying.
Cool. So I want to start the giveaway in just a second, but I'm gonna pop up one more question real quick. Let's just do this one because I need to show something first. It says, how do Unity employers value game dev experience in other technologies? So if you're hiring for a Unity job, does it matter? Is there value in having experience with Godot or Unreal or just general C# stuff or JavaScript? Or what do you guys think? I personally, I feel like there's value in all of it. I prefer that they have some Unity specific experience, ideally, because then I know that the ramp up time is going to be much, much quicker. But yeah, I think that they definitely value all of those things. What do you guys think, though? Do you see like the value in having that broad experience?
Depends on the time to get started with the developer. Like if I need somebody to hit the ground running immediately, then they have to have Unity experience, because even somebody who's got a massive amount of experience in Unreal or anything like that, if I need somebody to literally be rolling stuff out that week, I'm not going to be able to hire that person. But usually there's a much longer lead time in having that person come in, get started, and all the rest of it. So if they're an amazing Unreal developer, amazing Godot developer, or anything like that, they know what a game engine is. They know all the principles behind game development. They know where this stuff is. A lot of them, the skills are transversable. Transversable? That's not a bloody word. Transferable. So yeah, obviously. And same with C#. If somebody comes in and says, I have a massive amount of C# application experience, great. They can code in C#. They'll be able to read the C# code. It'd be great if they had some game development experience as well, because those principles are very helpful in there. But yeah, it's not invaluable. It's valuable going forwards. But it all depends on the lead time that the employer has to get going with you on that project they're actually doing. Like if I'm going to hire somebody that's going to be an AI developer, if they've got loads of engine experience but they've never done any AI work, then that's lead time. They're going to have to get going on that sort of thing. And it's the same thing with tooling, but just to a slightly lesser extent.
Yeah, I mean, this is my wheelhouse, because I'm a guy who does Unity, but at the same time, my selling point for a lot of people is I have done a bit of everything. Usually when I'm brought in on a team, I start with Unity, but I end up working on everything from their APIs and backends to the services that import their data scraping stuff to helping design UI in Figmas or XD, or helping with the sound design with Audition, and or helping with the marketing by doing some Premiere video. I've done a bit of each of the vastly different aspects of it. So I'm a bit biased because I'll always take extra skills as being cool, because I look at it as number one, you're going to hire someone for the job you're hiring them for, but every company has a million things needing doing, and the more roles you can slot someone into, the more invaluable you are to the company. So even though it may not come up right now, every game that you're making is going to eventually need a website. It's going to eventually need this, that, and the other. And if you've got someone on your team who could make a one-page quick website, or can take the template website you've got and modify the HTML to add the buttons to the, whatever solution you've got for some UI, but whatever, having extra skills is never a bad thing. But I will say, on a personal level, it's not going to be the deal breaker for me. It's nice to have, but if someone has 1 or 2 extra skills, that's not really going to mean much to me. If someone has 20 different skills, that speaks to a certain kind of person, somebody who consumes a lot of stuff. And that's very valuable to me. Not the skills they have per se, but the fact that they're the kind of person who has a very wide reach. So that's me personally.
That seems fair. I want to quickly just show the thing that we're giving away one last time, the hand-painted tile set bundle. Thank you, Daniel, for offering these up. If you wanted to win that, just enter the giveaway, choose a race and class, pop up. I'm going to start that thing in just a minute, so you've got maybe a minute or so to join if you want to enter to win that. And then next week, we'll probably give away a rider license as well, too. I think I just need to double check that I have more of them, and if not, get some refreshed, because I think I might have run out. I want to double check. I didn't want to give one away and not have one ready yet, so. All right. I had a couple more questions here I think we could go through, unless there was there anything else big that I've forgotten to talk about today that you guys wanted to get into or go over? I can't remember if there's anything else. I think we've kind of hit all the big topics that weren't question based.
Let's talk about Unity acquisitions some more. No,
Unity acquisitions? Are you offering to buy them now, Dave? No. Is that the plan?
No, they're too expensive at the moment. I'll wait till they get down to about $50 and then I'll put in my offer.
Put in your offer. You'll offer to 3D print them something for the company?
Nobody expects the Spanish acquisition, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no.
Okay, cool. Well, let's see. Were there any are there any big questions that popped up? Somebody did ask something that I don't know the answer to. Are there any tools to convert 3D characters or buildings into 2D stuff? I mean, other than just taking a flat screenshot. It made me think of it because I seen the Kenny NL tool that takes the 2D objects and he makes his 2D things into 3D things. Is there anything that does?
I've definitely seen them. I've never used them, but I've literally seen a thing which takes a 3D model and it'll take images from all sides and then generates a sprite map, and you can then move around and see the different sprites.
It's kind of what the imposter things do, right?
Yeah. Hades. There's a YouTube video from the company that does Hades, and they talk about how they take their 3D character, Supergiant, and they talk about how they take their 3D characters and the modeling they do there and produce the 2D stuff you see in the Hades video. And it's a really good talk. And the character artist who I've chatted to before, she goes over the whole thing. It's really, really good. I'd recommend jumping onto that and having a look.
There's also stuff like games like Swords and Sorcery and what was the other one? Basically, there's a bunch of games where they actually leave them as 3D models, but they use a combination of shaders to make it look like 2D from a different perspective. So the other option is 3D characters are much easier to scale for animations and things. You don't have to pay for multiple sprite sheets and whatever. And so you can actually, if you can get away with it, if it fits your game style, don't convert them at all. Just find a way to render them in a way that looks 2D, and you can then save a lot of resources in modeling.
A lot of anime is doing that now. For the video that they actually put out, there's an anime about somebody joining a games company, and that was one of the first ones that actually listed, when you go to the credits, it actually has Unity in the credits. But of course, it all looks 2D because it's beautifully rendered anime. But yeah, it's all 3D assets in there. They're rendered out. I believe so, anyway.
right. Well, I've started the giveaway. I guess we'll see who wins. We got a lot of Berserkers and a lot of Dragons. Dragons are always the most popular. I got to add in the new characters. Maybe I'll do that this week. Do a live stream and drop in some new characters and new models and stuff. Get things updated. But it's going up and running at least. We'll see who the winner is. If you wanted to see what the prize is, by the way, let me drop the link down. I dropped it in chat, but I'll just drop it down there one more time. Everybody can go check it out. And then I think I'm going to jump over to this more technical question, which was a pretty simple one, I think, unless I'm missing something. But it says, what's the most efficient way to filter collisions with my vehicle? Should I use tags, layers, or something else? They don't care about the road, but the difference between hitting different vehicles and buildings. So they want to kind of differentiate what if they're hitting a car, basically, or an obstacle. Do you guys have a thought? What would you go with by default here? Tags, layers, and assuming they want to collide with all of these things. So they do want to, it's not that they don't want to collide with these things. So they're not going to just be able to filter it out with layers.
Well, it's worth, yeah, it's worth knowing what you're trying to do. Like it's, so in general, the way it works is, you know, every collidable object that has colliders and rigid bodies on it will collide with each other. And then you compare that against the matrix, the collision matrix you can set for which objects collide against which objects. So step one is to minimize the number of things that can possibly be collided with. If you've got birds in your scene, don't have the, you know, cars colliding with birds if there's no conceivable way they can ever meet. Save yourself having to do checks against those objects. So set up a matrix that is limited to things that matter to collide with the things that you're doing with. Beyond that point, yeah, I guess the idea would be to filter those as much as possible. So
it seems fair, and it looks like there was a chat about it and some follow-up stuff where they decided to go dive into the collision matrix stuff, which should be interesting. And then Dave, somebody's asking if you have a link to that Hades video.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
let me. I actually was just literally was about to post it, but I'll post
you might be thinking of the No Clip documentary by the guys, because there was the Supergiant Games.
It's an actual video they did called 3D modeling and rigging. That actually goes into some.
I don't know if I've seen that one.
I believe it's this one. Obviously, I'm not going to watch it now to work it out if it was, but I believe I'm just trying to find it. I know they've got the modeling in there, and then I think they talk about moving it to the 2D later on. But I know it was under Supergiant Games somewhere, so go check it out.
Let's get subscribed and make sure the links are in chat too. We can go check those out. Ed had a question about the meetup, asking if the talks last time were recorded. I actually tried to record them and then ran into a technical problem. So I got most of the first one recorded, but that's it. So I think I'm probably not going to post them. This time it wasn't very good quality either on the recording, but on the next month's meetup, we might actually do like some better formal recording so that they can be viewed afterwards. I'm not completely sure though, because I kind of like the idea of the talks being just kind of like a one-off where people don't have to worry about it being out there, you know, if they more of like being able to test out the talk and try it like it's a real world meetup instead of a thing that you're throwing out on YouTube that I feel like has a bit more stress and weight behind it than like a little meetup thing that's getting tossed away afterwards, you know. But I'll talk to the people who do the talks next time and see what they want to do. If they want to post them, that's fine too. And then we got any other questions you guys wanted to take? Or does anybody else want to ask any questions? I got a couple things pinned, but nothing super.
I have a question. There's a question about moddable games, where to start making moddable games. That's a question I see fairly often, actually, on my own Discord in various ways. But I think what I'd ask really is, what's the general guideline of, hey, I want this game to be moddable? What's the key concept that I need to keep in mind when I start making the game to make sure that it is moddable? Like, how are games moddable? I actually have no idea how to make a moddable game.
It depends what level of moddability you want in your game as well. Like, is it going to be a full editor? Are you just going to mod levels? Are they going to be able to introduce aspects? Are they going to be able to mod how much a hit can cause, what that hit is, what that hit can hit, and all the rest of it. Like that level kind of determines how much you're going to expose in your engine to enable them to do the other stuff. I mean, making a level editor, for instance, can be very in depth, and suddenly you're finding yourself making the Unity tools for runtime. There's a guy called John Watson who works in Godot, whose talks on his channel are all about how he does it in Godot, bringing Godot into it, because I know some people ask about Godot. But he talks about making a level editor for his Godot game, which was like a not a top-down, a corridor shooter, and how he enables all of that stuff around and enables people to just literally add the data for a level and then be able to share that. And then you can go all the way through to something like Big Planet, Little Big Planet, where they had massive level editor with loads of physics stuff you could add to it and change attributes around that. But it's exposing elements of your game and how much you want to expose and how you want to expose that, and then putting nice tools around it. Be a good tools developer before you decide to build a moddable game as well, because some moddable games you go in, you're like, just no. But yeah.
Yeah, so okay, I love this topic. This is a great one because it's very big, but there's a lot of interesting nuances to it. So first things first, what do we mean by moddable? And so perfectly, as Dave was saying, that's not like a straight answer. The short answer would be there's a lot of stuff in a game engine that you use a game engine for to make and then push out there. That's like the difference between making a cake and making a cake making tool, right? There's a fundamental difference in like how much you have to give. If you build an engine, you have to include it with your game, as Dave was saying. But the question becomes, how much of that do you want to customize? Do you want to customize that, or do you want to customize the color, or do you want to customize certain things? And so if we're just talking code, the simplest example would be you make a hook of some kind. You do something that can be hooked or modified or changed. The easiest solution for that is just to have, say, a file that when you install the game, you can open the file. Maybe you change some values in the file. That's like the lowest level of modding. You've exposed some values, you can change the values. The next level might be textures. You can either have the textures in a folder, modify the textures, Minecraft, classic example, and you get different textures for the game that you're doing. Or if you want to go one step further, you could have a drop folder of some kind. So your game has a folder where you literally monitor the folder. If files are dropped in and the names match, put it into your game, modify it there. Now, the downside of all of these approaches is you are pre-writing all of the things that can be done, and you are then reading those in, hoping that they match or that they're there. The next level is, how do I allow mods that I don't have to like manually pre-write all of the systems for? Well, you need to build a pseudo language for your game that other people can engage with. Now, the fancy version of this is something called the DSL, or domain-specific language, where you write your own language that people can write code into your code for. Good example of this, Minecraft, one of the mods is Lua, and you can write Lua scripts and then run the Lua scripts in Minecraft. Or later on, they added their own scriptable computers. So that's it in the code side. But that's not what most people mean when they mean modded. They mean I want to put in different assets and art and do fun stuff with it. So take something like VRChat. VRChat is a moddable Unity project. And the way they did it originally is they exported out a Unity package on their side, which was a bunch of scripts and tools. And then you would build your own thing with their tools. You would export your own package, and then you'd be able to drop that into something and they would read it and use it as part of the game. So you would have to basically come up with a contract thing that can be used. So it basically boils down to what tools do you give someone to use to make your thing with. A lot of this is usually, quite frankly, too much for most games. So the two easiest kind of modding solutions is one, have assets acquired from elsewhere that can then be pulled down. Good example of this being addressables or something. If there is a location somewhere that isn't the computer that assets are gotten from, a good example being like a web server where there's a list of directories, you could literally have a vetting system where people upload files to that service and you can pull them down and then include them in your game. That's a fancy version of kind of what Steam Workshop does. It's like people create packages have some hooked system in it, and then the game can pull down the hooked things, reference what's been added, process and run them. All of that's fine, but as Dave was alluding to, the more complicated the stuff you can do, like changing a model, fine. Changing a model but making a new enemy, bit more complicated. Making a new enemy with its own AI that's not like the AI for the existing characters, suddenly you can't just bind a thing to a thing. You have to somehow have an AI writing tool. So what do? Do you build a second AI writing tool and then exclude that? It starts to get complicated. So what a lot of people do is they limit their modding to being things like a level builder. A level builder is, on the grand scale of things, surprisingly simple, because if you can explain your level as a serialized piece of data, you can save it and load it as you would normally. And so a good example of this is if I can build a grid of characters, S stands for sea, G stands for ground, E stands for enemy. I could just build 3 layers of text files where it's just E, ground, water, whatever. I could load that in and the game will construct it from my file. Suddenly my modding is as simple as doing that. Then you could even build a second application which generates these text files by playing around in a different editor. And so the two can talk to you. There's lots of ways to do it this way. And you'll find a lot of games do that. The mod files are actually stored out and loaded back in some fashion. Same with save files. In the old days where it was a serial key, you could load it out and load it back in again. That's probably the easiest. The next step, like I said, would be something like some external store. If you really want to do this, look into specifically the Steam Workshop stuff. And there is a patcher tool on the asset store. I've not used it myself, but it's probably doing as good as anything else. I would say, though, in general, I wouldn't worry too much. The truth of the matter is almost any game in the world can be modded, insofar as you can pull down the damn code, you can decompile stuff, you can make changes, you can then patch in your changed code. Like, there's a literal video out there on YouTube I saw where someone takes the game Tunic and gives themselves new things. Like, it's as an example of how you could do it. And so you can do this already. And if your game gets popular enough that people start doing this, then maybe you can start questioning whether or not it's worth investing the resources that, hang on, people are already modding. Like, people think about Minecraft, one of the modest games of all time. Its original modding wasn't supported by the game's creators. There was someone decompiled the game, made the Minecraft patcher kit that you would have to install, which was someone else's decompiled version of Minecraft to mod, to then inject in your changes into Minecraft just to make mods. It wasn't until they were like, okay, people are doing this already, we might as well first party this and start leaning in properly. So modding shouldn't be your sales pitch for your game, because you should already have a good game if it's worth modding into, right? Modding is an engine of growth based around the idea of virality. And if your game isn't viral yet, there's not a lot you can do with that. If you want to start by saying content creation is a pillar of your game, that's not the same thing. Content creation is exposing content creation methods in your game, and you can do that as simply as having loadable texture packs, or some place you can load models up and be verified, or some way to import and export text files that represent quest sequences, or some kind of sequence of AI for an enemy, or something that moves, providing you've pre-written all of the steps. If an enemy can move, shoot, rotate, pick up weapon, use special ability, blah, 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 you could build a text file format that's your own DSL that says move, shoot, if low health, regenerate. You could build something that could be parsed and read in, and then your game can process it. But again, these should be entirely scalable relative to the project you're building. If your game depends on you having a really good level builder to make the game successful, it's not good. It's not a good idea,
And also be prepared to support it.
Mm.
That is a massive business decision. Supporting a moddable game versus supporting a game is a big difference.
So it sounds like, it sounds like, I mean, I suppose there's probably a game concept that requires moddability, where VR chat, for example, pretty much that is its hook, it seems like. But for most cases, it sounds like deciding to make your game moddable at the beginning is very much what we were talking about earlier, kind of a wasted time because you don't need it. And it's almost like buying a house with a big garage to support the truck that you're going to buy because you want to buy a boat one day. So you have to get the house to get the truck because you need the truck to pull the boat that you're going to buy one day. And you don't have a boat yet. So
and there's also the other thing to note, which is if you start to lean into making your game moddable, you have to start by making your game modular, and all of a sudden you're going to pay for costs you didn't think about. For example, if my game can be built out of modular components, suddenly a lot of things can't be statically baked. Suddenly I need to have light probe groups and reflection probes in every modular piece. Andrew knows this quite well, with each piece of his cave thing needing to have reflections and probes and whatever. And if your game is entirely modular, think of how hard it's going to be. Like, someone could inject a model into your game, but are they going to be able to inject the model and correctly set up light probes and correctly set up reflection probes and all the other stuff? So there's a lot more into this than just, can I drop a model in, right? And this gets into, like, we know how hard it is to take a simple 3D character, it's an FBX of a 3D character, and put it in Unity and it not to have random scales and bones incorrectly and whatever. Now you're dealing with someone doing this at runtime without the tools to try to drop it into your project. There's a reason why even things like VRChat, they have a rigging tool that you install into an empty Unity project. You build your character, validate that the bones and things are all set up correctly, and so the engine doesn't have to try to guess whatever the hell you gave it, right? There's a lot of work in doing that. And I think in most cases, modding isn't as important as having that player agency, and you can get away with that by level creation. It doesn't sound like much, but if your game is fun, being able to make your own variations of things is more than good enough, you know?
My favorite part of Excite Bike was making my own levels. Couldn't save them. I would make my own levels, play them once, and then be like, yeah, that was fun. I made a level.
That was me and Tony at Tony Hawk's, but the problem with that was the size was so small. I'd be the kind of person who wanted to like really have like minute little details everywhere, and it's like, oh, you're running out of your limit. Fine, I'll delete the 50 little things I've placed and then build one giant extra ramp. So it didn't work for the way I wanted to play it. But the Portal 2 one was great. That was one of the best level builders I've ever seen.
You find sometimes that when it's a custom engine and they're building tools for that engine, like the level editors are already there.
Yeah, good point.
We, especially back in the day when we were doing stuff for Sony, I built the level editors to build so the artists and designers could build the levels for the game. So we had a level editor available. When I built my first indie games company and we didn't have Unity, we were building 2D games. We built our own game engine. And of course, I had a designer and I had artists, and I had to build level editors to be able to do that. So we could have released those, but I didn't want to support them. So that was
I think Valve is the best example of that, right? Like the Source engine in particular, like a lot of the tools you're using for Source Filmmaker and stuff, they're just slightly tweaked versions of the tools they already had inside, right? They were already using those tools. It's just making them approachable to people, and because that's the thing. Tool developers are going to make the tools minimum they need to. It doesn't need all the user-friendly stuff. Like I built tools for artists and stuff where if you click the wrong sequence of buttons, it'll crash. But you know what? They know not to do it. I told them. So it's not worth spending the resources to put in all the extra error checking, whatever. If it happens, we'll fix it then. But for now, resources need to go elsewhere.
A whole other topic on this is validation, like validating, as Jason's story brought up, the stuff they put in and having it tell them, you did this wrong. This is what you should do. Do you want to fix it now? Is there automatic fixes? Yeah. Don't get me wrong. Absolutely love building level editors, but I'm a tools developer by trade. So there you go.
Yeah, actually, that's a whole other fun conversation. I'd love to have a big giant discussion about that someday, where it's like, why did your application break? Oh, because a character field ran out of a certain number index. How did that happen? There's like no way that can happen. It's like, oh, well, the designer was doing something. What were they doing? Oh, they were copying, pasting. Where did they copy it from? Oh, well, so they took this text from this website and they pasted this thing. And it's like, so there was hidden, invisible JavaScript characters in the text that they tried to paste into the label field that shouldn't have been. It's like, okay, like, why would I have tested for like using, invalid character checks against possible JavaScript? Okay, fine, I get it. Right? So sometimes you'll hit these issues where you're like, nobody would do that. Why would they do that? But yeah, it happens.
Oh, I once had a designer ask me when we were talking about building a tool for this level, I just want it to know what I'm thinking. It's like, I'm going to slap you. But anyway, on the side. Oh, Jason's been summoned.
I'd say you got to just hook up one of these real quick.
Oh, there we go.
Start reading their mind and then code it like that.
Oh, I've got another one. I've got a next mine sitting around. I think it's in the
one of
workshop
those are there too. Yep. Just pop them both on. We'll start mind reading the designer's wishes and be like, oh no, this is definitely the game that you thought of. That's
it would just literally spew. It would just spew hate onto the screen. I don't read that. I love my designers.
Here's the number one life pro tip if you ever build a tool. If you're a tool developer building for anyone else to use it, for the love of God, there's one tip more than anything else in the entire world. If you ever have a button that does anything, rebuilds a mesh, generates a level, does a random whatever, you need what's called a busy flag. Because if you don't put the bloody busy flag in, every single person is going to click it. And if they don't get immediate 4-second feedback of what's good, well, this doesn't work. I know it's building an entire game level in the entire background, but no, it didn't work immediately. So they will keep mashing that button. And if you don't check against this and either cancel an asynchronous task and remake it, or the better option, turn off the button, wait till they're done, and then turn it back on again, they will break your application. So number one most important thing as a tool developer is expect everyone in the entire world to press go with empty fields and to click buttons that are, if they're available, they'll click the buttons. So
with context, like when they press the button, context that is doing, because a number of times you pause the thing because they're processing and you cancel out the button, but you don't give context. They close the application. They're like, it's broken. It's crashed. They close the application, start up again. Press the button again. It's broken. It's crashed. Close the application. And then they complain to the producer they spent an hour working on it. You're like, oh, I should have just put some context around. There was we go back to the 80s and 90s, but there was a 3D modeling application that had it was a traffic light in the corner. And it would literally, when you press something, because we were doing these big modeling tools and stuff like that, it would pause, but all what would happen, it wouldn't give you any context. The traffic light would just go red in the corner. And you just see the artists being so frustrated, trying to avoid the red traffic light. I've got to do so much before I get the red traffic light. And then when they get the red traffic light, that's it. They just go and get their coffee.
Yeah, I would say too, and this is where it goes from normal, just general advice to like architectural code questions. The reason why, my opinion, but the reason why a lot of applications fail to have good validation is because they think validation is the same thing as business logic. What I mean by that is your application should do something. It should save a file, regenerate some object. It should, process something, generate whatever the thing it does is. And then unrelated to this is you build a packet of data, where it goes, which items, how many of them, whatever it is, and you send that to your thing, press go when it does the job. Now, whose job is it to make sure that the numbers are valid, the text is valid, the button's only pressed once, all of that stuff? A lot of people tie that stuff right there into the middle of the code. And so you end up with this really, if the name has this and it's not blank and all this stuff, and you end up with code which is really what they call brittle, which is any small change, you have to ricochet, break all this stuff. What you should do instead is you create a UI, the UI does whatever, and then at some point you press go. This is basically the concept of having MVVM or something with some kind of view model that gets spit out the other end of it. The UI does stuff, and then a valid model is spit out. If a valid model is not spit out, don't let them do whatever it is they're trying to do because they haven't got the right data. If the model is valid, it gets sent to the system doing the thing, and the system returns back to the UI and says, I'm busy. Don't let any other thing happen till I get back to you with some update. And then the UI does something. It spins the thing or it does whatever. And then the system doing the work sends messages back and say, oh, we're nearly there, 10% of the way. Okay, we got a bit more done. This one's finished. Oh, we have a warning, but it's not broken. And then the UI receives these messages and displays them in some meaningful way that updates the user. And then when it's done, it either cancels or succeeds, sends a message back to the UI, and the UI releases and can be done again. The reason you do this is the system can now run, hypothetically, against a console application. Because as long as a console application can generate a valid model, it doesn't matter that it wasn't a big shiny UI. And I say this to say that if you later on want to add really fancy features like voice control, where they dictate what they want it to do, that's like, how do I build a system where you can dictate the shape of the levels? Well, if existingly it basically writes text and the text is used to parse into the level, then all you're doing is validating the text is valid, but then all you have to do is validate the voice turns into valid text, job done. So you're not solving this pipeline. You've got this, it turns to text. You just need to build a UI layer which creates a valid model from text. So this gets into a much more complicated relationship between, service layer and building UI. But all I'll say is that validation fails most of the time because people try to validate all of the time in all of the stuff they're doing. You should instead treat the UI like it builds a packet of a statement of a request, and then some system that takes requests, and at some point a request gets sent to the system. And if you do that, systems can change, UI can change, nothing's going to break either way. And you'll be able to comfortably add new validation. And what I mean by this is often I'll do a thing with just a text box, and if you put in the wrong value, I'll spit a horrible red message on the screen and saying, don't do this. But then later on, I'll come back and then make it like fade in and the thing will glow red. It'll give you all the nice UX design principle stuff. But that doesn't impact anything because the rules are still the same. is valid, is not valid, so on. I have an example of this somewhere. If I thought this was coming up, I would have brought it up, but I have a nice little version of the text input box that does all of this. I'll show you next time.
Yeah, we'll have to dive into that. There was a comment too about maybe in the future we do a whole episode dedicated to kind in the right ways, or maybe one just kind of focused on tools design with it as kind of a, I don't know, maybe a pre-planned thing. I feel like it's something that comes up often enough that it might be worth dedicating an episode to. Just kind of talk about diving into good tool design, what makes good tools, what makes bad tools, like all that kind of stuff, and whatever other things you guys think might be interesting.
I think tool design is super fun. Once I mean, I never did it for a long time, where I did very basic stuff, but once you get into it, the speed of things that, or just enabling things that you couldn't do before, is just really empowering. Yeah, it's fun. I like it.
You don't notice how much time you lose on things, like the very simple stuff, like one, again, drives me insane because I work with designers, is there's one particular thing we have in one project where the guy's like, oh, I just need to turn this thing on and turn this thing off. Every time he presses play, he wants to debug something. He presses pause, scrolls down the hierarchy, finds 3 objects and toggles 2 off and then toggles 1 on and then unpresses it. I'm just like, I could just write you a thing, like 2 lines. It would be a drop down at the top that says mode A, mode B, or whatever. He's like, no, it's fine. I'm like, okay. But then we sit there and we're debugging the problem for about 2 hours. Like it's an ongoing, lots of issues, fixing things. And every time I have to sit there and watch him do the pause and do the thing. And I'm like, now you're not just wasting your time. Every time you do this, you're losing 2 or 3 minutes of both of our times as we go through this stupid cycle where we could have done this once at the start of the damn project. It doesn't have to be a fancy UI. It could literally be a context menu that's static at the top that has a hard-coded find of type or find by name, horrible code in a real project, perfectly fine in a tool, find all 3 objects, turn on, turn off, turn on, job done. That's it. That would have saved us both like a third of the development time that we're working on.
Yeah, I built myself a tool, just a window that has all my packages in the main project. I click a button to move everything in, click a button to move everything out. It's an ugly script. It works it's boilerplate. If you can drag in these folders, but it only does the demo scene in the package and that's it. But it works, and so I just click the buttons and then I can upload it. Click the buttons, then I can upload something else, and it saves roughly 3-4 minutes per package. So when I'm uploading 25 packages to update them all, that's gonna save me 2 hours of my life. Not to mention the brain power of making sure, did I move it to the right spot, waiting for it, oh shoot, I moved it to the wrong spot, let me undo it. Yeah,
it's also scalable because it's never that simple. Like it starts out by going, okay, I'm conceptually switching between 2 modes, or I'm moving between debug and not debug. And right now it's 2 things. But then later on you add a 3rd thing. And I was like, oh, did I remember to add the 3rd thing? Well, rather than remembering to add the 3rd thing, you go to the automated thing that does it and you add the 1 line once. It's all about, I say this so often, it's about minimizing the amount of things you have to think about later. Like architecture, it's not about solving every answer all the time. It's that these things exponentially get harder. And if you just put a little bit in place, it's meant that the next time it's just 1 or 2 things to change, not lots of things to remember.
Yeah. Johnny's got a follow-up question about tools, so I had to pop it up. If you're not subscribed to his channel, by the way, you should definitely go check out Turbo Makes Games. But the question says, speaking of tools, how do you handle lots of long tooltip messages? Do you just put them in code or save them off externally in an asset or a file? So if you got like long tooltips using the tooltip attribute, do you just type that all out right above the thing? That's what I do. Even if it's long, I just put the entire thing right there in the message. And I try to make them relatively long and detailed for the tooltips, if it makes sense. If there's anything that a designer has asked me about it, I try to include that in there because I know that somebody's wondering it.
Yeah, I do tooltips mostly on any of like my custom editors where there's different options. Even if I think it's fairly obvious what it does, I'll always put tooltips on almost every single thing. Even I'll put a little circle with an eye info thing so people know that, hey, there's something here. And so you hover over and there's going to be a big chunk. And I do that in the line. So it's just part of the label, really.
So the other thing I do is I try not to make my tooltips too long, because then they just get abusive with the size of the font and the size that they come up with. But anybody that works on things knows that the component will have a description at the top of it in a box that will give you some help around the actual component. But then with that, I have overridden the open URL on that component that leads you to a wiki that gives you much more detailed analysis and step-by-step instructions.
Exactly.
If you try and give a massive step-by-step in a tooltip, the rendering of that tooltip tends to screw up all over the place. It might go off the screen. It might be just messy, or it might go over other components in the thing that you want to look at to get context around the component that you're looking at and the variable that you're trying to play with on that component or the tool you're trying to use. So a lot of times I will say there's a tooltip that gives you some question, that gives you some answers about what the thing is, so you don't have to just guess it from the name. Any more context to that, description at the above, and the open URL button is overridden, so you can jump to that.
Yeah, I was going to say 100% exactly the same. There's a difference between a tooltip and a description, like a full-on essay. Yeah. And so what I do is I pasted a link there, Jason, as a reference. This is a script in a helper library that I've got on my GitHub. So you can see I have the component menu, I have a help URL, and then I have a help tooltip for each of the things. But the tooltip literally just says, this is what it does. But if you want more information, you don't rely on the tooltip. In the Unity editor, if you click the help link, it will move you to the help stuff for the scenes in the project, which I've linked to there as a second link. And so you start to get more context from an entire web page that then gives you more information. So now it's not only just what did the script do, but it tells you how should it work, what should you expect, how would it visibly appear, and then you can go in and view the source code and link the stuff and then find addendum extra information and so on. So that to me, I think, is the good middle ground, is you have enough info. If you hovered over it, you'd see what's going on. Any more questions, you go into the actual, documentation associated.
And I'm going to beat a dead horse a little bit around this, in the fact that with validation and having little markers come up if somebody puts the wrong thing into the thing, these all blend into the same thing. You've got tooltip that gives you general concept of what the thing does. You've got the help URLs there, and you've got validation to say, you've done something wrong, this is what it is. And some people even have expandable descriptions underneath more complicated components, underneath each variable that you can press to read more about, so it doesn't destroy the reading of the actual component itself. But you can drop down and say, okay, there's a few more details around this, and then the validation goes around all the rest of it.
Yeah, and I pasted another link. Here's an example of something else that I like to do, which is on validation. Validation in code, there's two ways to do validation. You can validate that the information is correct, or you can validate that you're allowed to put incorrect information in. And if you're writing custom editor tools, you have a lot more control. In my case, I will actually make little helper things. I have this thing called a fixed dependency or fixable dependency, where I can mark a field as saying, not only is it required, but I can make a best guess how to fix it, which could be a find object of type or a, get child or something. And so this way I can specifically say, hey, this is required. You're missing it. I know you're missing it, but I have a nice big button here and I'll do my best to fix it for you. So you can validate by just validating, but you can also, if you know how it should look, you can do your best guess to fix it, which is why my preference is I make everything fields that are dependent in my scripts, so you have to drag it in, but then I also use prefabs with them pre-dragged in. So if you just grab the prefab and drop it into a scene, it should all be hooked up for you. If you mess with it for whatever reason, they will turn red, but then they will also tell you this was supposed to be underneath here as a child. If it's not there, click button and I'll either try to get it or try to fix it. If that's not what you want to do, I'm not going to force you to it. If you want to move an object to a different script, you can do that, but I'm going to do my best to automate it for you.
You can even see an example of it in the material when you put in a non-normal map onto a normal map entry, and it says, this isn't a normal map, do you want to fix it? And it gives you a fix now button that you can press to change it to a normal map texture.
Is that where you stole that from, Jason? Like, I'm going to make everything act like a normal map?
I don't remember where I stole that from. It was I think it's probably like, it goes back to, I think I said before, the days when I worked in enterprise and I built a little helper tool from a friend of mine, and I'll never forget, it was so debilitating, is I built a thing where you could load up a text file and it would automatically parse the file and load in a bunch of data based on, he was like typing in email addresses by hand, and I was like, if you just load this text file with all the addresses in it, I've done it for you. and he opened the thing that said pick file, and he's like, oh, cool. And then he pressed cancel, and the whole app crashed. I'm like, it never occurred to me someone would open up the like choose file and then not return a file. That's what you press choose file for. You're about, obviously, like, that can happen, but the point is, in all of my testing, sitting there, I never once personally clicked choose file and then said, no, don't want to anymore. So ever since then, I'm like, everything, no, we're making sure.
Yeah. I think I learned to start really protecting data when I discovered SQL injection hacks, and I realized that they were possible, and it was very easy for me to fuck things up and make it so people could inject things. So like, oh, okay, I need to validate not just like tiny bits of data, but like everything needs to be validated, escaped, checked, and I need to make sure that we're dealing with valid stuff here all the time. It was a big lesson for me the first time I saw something.
It's funny too, because it's super important. Like, I have a friend of mine at the moment, and she's learning PHP, and she's currently writing a system which is like a JavaScript front end with a chart that's tied to a PHP backend. And long story short, in the process of the API call, she's constructing the SQL statement in the backend by appendings. And I'm just like, at some stage, I'm going to have to explain to you SQL injection, but you're still learning this stuff, and I don't want to freak you out.
Not yet. Yeah. First, you got to see that it works, and then you're like, that's very cool. One little issue.
Years and years ago, I learned the hard way that first, I don't know how to stop that, and second, I don't want to learn, and third, people hacked my stuff. So, yeah, that was bad.
Yeah, they definitely will. They'll try if you. Yeah, I would avoid dealing with it myself now too. That's why they got libraries to handle most of that stuff. Although in PHP, I don't know how it is now, but last time I was using it, you were just writing SQL, like, right in the PHP file. So there was one other thing that I wanted to pop up before we wrap it up today, which wasn't so much a question, but it was a comment about data-driven design that I thought you guys might appreciate. And it just said, I never got driven design until I sat down and all of the major structs for my game, and it was a huge eye-opener that it's kind of like a roadmap for the functions and the stuff that you need to kind of clarify your game. And I mean, I think that this can make a lot of sense if you start to just think about your game as the actual data. If you strip away all of the art, all of the visuals and everything, and just put it into your head as data, or into like an Excel sheet of like, what are the things that matter and kind of get interacted with, it can totally change the way that you view the game. And I think that there's a lot of value in viewing your game that way. Like, I think of it with like the space station project that I was fucking around with. Let me see. Do I have that open right now? I don't know if I have it. I don't have it up right now, but I mean, I'll pull it up later. But with that one, like, I can think of, I've got all the visual elements, space stations, the stuff flying around and all that. But if I boil it down to like the core of like what the mechanics are in the gameplay, it's really just a couple numbers that are moving around for economic stuff, like the amount of things each resource has, or amount of resources each player or entity in the game has, and the rates that they're trading them at. That's pretty much all the data. That and the positions or the times, between the stations, like that stuff. It can all boil down to just very simple structs and data, which does make the way that you kind of figure out that code and the way that you build that application easier. But have you guys, do you ever just like write out all of the data for your stuff, or do you think that through in your head, or is there like a process that you guys go through for something like this?
It's all in my mind.
You just do it in your head, kind of like map out that structure, or?
Yeah, that's how I probably do. I don't write it down first, generally.
Hold on, Minority Report, it's all in the air. You're just sort of pulling pieces.
I never write it down first, but I will occasionally grab
UML diagrams,
and I'll sketch out what they actually end up being. So like, I'll start coding it, and then I'll look at it a little bit, and then I'll kind of take a break, maybe in my bedroom or something, with a notepad, and be like, so these are the actual things that matter. And these are the things that I think that I should have and that I have based on what I'm looking at. And then usually I'll go back like the next morning, do a quick comparison, find the extra shit that it's like duplicate or unneeded, delete that out, and kind of restructure things a little bit based off of that. But I never do like a full like design up in advance or anything like that.
No,
Well,
I'm firmly against
UML.
it.
Jason's going to say he does UML diagrams everywhere for everything he does.
Please, like
Turn
when
the
you said
camera
UML, I
into
felt like a
a big
vampire. I felt like
whiteboard.
you just
Yeah.
held up a cross. I was like, UML. I will say I was very much. I love the promise of UML. I was exactly that guy who was like, "This is it. I'm going to get a big piece of paper and I'm going to get it right the first time." It is the biggest. One of the biggest things he ever did for my career was to ditch UML as a concept, because for the way my brain works, UML is so detrimental because it forces me to try to answer all of the questions at once. And for certain kinds of people, that is debilitating. That will stop you doing anything if you have to try to get everything right the first time. And so I would write literally 40 different, completely from scratch UMLs going, but then this wouldn't work here, and that's not decoupled enough, and I couldn't, and you end up like freaking yourself out. And what I've learned, for me at least, is I agree on the sentiment of the data being the core of the game, and a very fundamental exercise is, could you play Skyrim with no UI? If it was just a text adventure, it would be very difficult to decide every single text action of move forward, pick weapon, query for enemies nearby, do. But if it was step by step as a game and you were doing it in console, technically that game is playable. It just wouldn't probably be very fun. And so I try to imagine all of my projects that way. Could I take any project I make and could I play it or run it in text? And can I design my code so I can talk to it with that assumption? Do this, open this, turn that, whatever, and then treat my application as cleanly as possible. Then all the other UI stuff on top of it is incidental. It can be dials or buttons or sound effects or voice control or 3D models, or none of that matters. The data is what's important. So I do agree on that front, but the things that I rail against is, one, again, UML, you're going to be forced to know the answers to every question, which one, you don't. You just simply don't. It's a waste of your time. And two, every project changes. And if you ever try to plan more than 10 steps ahead, that's like climbing a mountain and planning every footstep. You can plan to climb a mountain, but you cannot plan for every single step you're going to take, because as soon as you get derailed once, you'll freak out. And again, to show how that my brain works like that, I've only ever had 3 panic attacks in my life, and 2 of them were one directly after the other. And it was in a side note, I was back in college and I was doing the main courses, everything was fine, but I had to do like a pickup class. I'd missed something because I was out for a few months for something, and they said, "Oh, do a business class." And so business was like a side thing. And I'll be honest, it was the business class that nobody really wanted to do. It was like this side thing where half the people in there were from other courses like physical therapy or nursing, and they're just, we'll just do business. Nobody gave a crap. Now, I'm the IT overachiever, so I'm sitting there in the back of class going, I did, business when I was in school. I know this stuff. I can read a book on it and whatever. And so even in the class, everyone's like, "Oh, he's gonna be fine." And so we go to give the presentation. I'm like, "I'm a talker. I'm an Irish guy. I can give this." And so I memorized this big thing. I wrote a business plan. I memorized it and I go out there. And I'm now standing in front of these 6 people giving my presentation, starting off real confident. I get 3 lines in and I skip a line. I say like the line 5 instead of line 4. And I suddenly catch myself going, "Oh, that's not the right." And suddenly I lose my entire place. And now I'm just sitting there frozen going, I've been repeating the script in my head for 4 hours, like constantly walking in circles, getting this right. I had the patter down. I had hand motions mapped to each thing. And I miss a line and I freeze. And then all of a sudden, like, biggest panic attack I've ever had. I can't even breathe. My eyes are starting to glaze up. And they're like, "Are you okay?" And so I end up needing to go outside and I get some water and deep breath and try again. And I come back in. Same thing happened at like line 8 or something this time. Now, before this, I'd given like 40 different presentations. No problem. I've been on stage. I've talked to loads of people. I've never had an issue. But all of them were a series of bullet points I would talk around. I would give myself enough hooks to plan ideas on. But if I followed the script and I missed something, you lose your place. All of this is to say, when it gets to the whole gaming thing, like, if you try to plan too far ahead and stuff goes wrong, the whole thing suddenly looks like a nightmare to you. If you plan 3 or 4 steps ahead and you have to course correct, you just step to the left, step to the right. You can easily adjust to what's going on. There's a reason why software as an industry has pivoted away from the waterfall 6 to 12 month business plans cycles to people aim for 2 months or less. And if you can, in fact, some people aim for continuous integration and continuous deployment at like 2 to 4 day cycles. It's insane. But we're certainly not aiming for 6 months. And so if you're planning your game, not only is it a bad idea architecturally, it's a bad idea from a gameplay perspective. because there's a concept of finding the fun. And once you start your project, you may have a very strong assumption of what your game's going to be, but something really fun could happen by accident. And if you're so regimentedly going to stick to what you originally planned, you will miss the actually good game that happened when you were making your game. But if you're willing to be open-minded about it, you might pause, reevaluate, and go, the whole farming angle doesn't work. It's not fun. But this one weird bug where the house spawned 6 copies of itself for some reason is really fun. Maybe we should have a city building portion of this, which is some part. And so you play test that and you move into it and your game becomes something different. I said that before. Original Halo was a top-down RTS game called Monkey Punch or something. And it wasn't a first-person shooter. That changed because the game became something more fun that way. So don't plan too far ahead. And UML is the ultimate plan too far ahead master tool that you should avoid like the plague.
My first enterprise job had us do everything in UML before we could actually write a line of code. And it was useless.
Yeah. I remember having to document every single method once of some code, like write code documentation for them all. And when you started talking about this, it reminded me a lot of one of the places where the first step was always to create the database structure. And then the application had to be based off of that. So first, like 2 months of figuring out the database structure, then another 2 months of figuring out the code structure, and then the rest of the time trying to figure out how to make it all fucking work because things were different from what we had initially guessed on the database structure, right? Like constantly just dealing with that. Yeah. Plan. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of pre-planning that stuff either, like you. Let it come out, and then, like I said, I like to just take a look at it afterwards, write it down, and make sure that it matches, and kind of do some reality checks along the way. Make sure that the stuff that I'm thinking the way that I think it should be structured, the way that makes sense logically, is the right way when I'm not looking at the code too. So thinking about it outside and look at it again, do a comparison, make sure I didn't miss anything there. All right. Well, I think that's probably enough for today. You guys got anything else you want to share before we wrap it up and say goodbye to everyone? Other than to go check out the Humble Bundle, of course, which I assume everybody's already grabbed. Is that a no?
No. The Humble Bundle does end in 4 days. It's 4 days left.
Oh, I didn't realize it was that close.
Yep.
Well, I'll drop the link in chat again so everybody can go grab it. It's also down in the description. So make sure that you check that out. Grab it if you wanted it. It's only going to be there for a little while longer, it looks like. So other than that, I've got nothing else to share. I guess I'll just say, if you're still here with us, please hit the thumbs up button, subscribe, share. Oh, definitely check out Jason's stories.
I feel obliged. I haven't really been marketing too much, but I'm kind of going to start trying to step up that game as a reminder. So this is my website. There's a link there to YouTube stuff I do, some blog post stuff I do. That code example we showed earlier is up there, the one with the Simpsons quote printing thing. And there's also a big link to my Ko-fi page, which, if you join, gets into my Discord. And if you like these kinds of large ranting discussions, there's a lot of that on my Discord. So
there are a ton of those discussions. I watch them almost every day. And Dave, what's this? Oh, somebody made a YouTube channel?
If you just, yeah, it's there.
Yes, if you're not subscribed to Dave's channel, I'll drop the correct link in, and then you can go check it out. He's always got awesome videos on stuff that nobody else is doing videos on. It's like, I feel like that's the one thing that's very unique about like your videos. There's nobody else doing the same thing. You're not going to find like another video that covers the shit that Dave covers. It's always like these unique things that I don't know. It's pretty fucking cool.
There are no beginner tutorials.
Yeah, I will say no offense to any of the rest of you, but of everyone's content here, I'm always most interested when Dave drops a video because it's usually
you're too kind.
There's a 50% chance it's something I've not done before, and then there's a 20% chance it's a way I've never done before. So either way, it's there's a higher opportunity for me to learn something new whenever Dave drops a video.
Oh yeah, I always learn something when I watch Dave's videos. It's always like it's shit that's just not out there already that people haven't already shared. So super helpful for me.
Everybody learns how to do the unsubscribe button when they watch my video.
They have one of those. All right. Well, thanks again. Make sure you check out Infinity as well. There's a link to your latest asset in the description. It was the low poly spider, and of course the humble bundle and all that. And then I guess we will see you all again next week. Nothing special going on next week, right? Yep. So we'll see you next Sunday.
Bye, everyone.
Good luck.